Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thanks for coming. This is the Sherborn Advisory Committee of February meeting of February 28th, 2024. Call the meeting to order. Let me do a quick screen share of the agenda and get that approved before we get going. And give me just 1 second to get my screen organized. All right. Off and running. Okay, so plan for tonight on the agenda, we'll do the usual liaison reports. We have minutes to approve from our February 7th meeting. And then our current meeting items include budget review for remaining capital items and special purchase items. And that will include presentations on the open space and recreation plan, on IT capital, the Pine Hill School, HVAC work, the Sherborn History Center and Museum, and the Rec Commission capital projects, the tennis courts, pickleball courts. And that's the plan for tonight. Anybody with any changes to that amendment, edits, changes, anything that you should switch around or that isn't there that should be? Okay, then I would welcome a motion to approve the agenda as just read.
So moved.
Nora, was that a second?
Second, thank you.
Okay, we'll do a quick roll call. Nora,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
Mike W,
Aye.
Ken,
Aye.
Mike F,
Aye.
Shelley,
Aye.
and I am I as well. So that gets us 7-0 approving the agenda. Okay, very good. Any liaison reports, anything anybody wanted to bring back? I've got one thing, but before I get to that, let me just check in with everybody. If anybody has anything else. Okay, so the one thing I wanted to do is just to take a minute for, particularly for new members on the committee, and also as a reminder for others who've done this before, about the public hearing. So March 16th, Saturday, the public hearing is going to be scheduled to start at 8:30. I'm going to post an advisory committee meeting starting at 8:15. Just so in case we have any last minute business to do before the public hearing starts, we have the space to do that. 15 warrant articles. Hopefully it won't be too long a public hearing, although in recent past years, it's gone until as late as 5. So it easily could be an all-day event. We'll take a break for lunch. We'll take a couple other short breaks, but it will be a long all-day event. And the sequence will be to consider each of the warrant articles. And for each of the articles that we consider, including the operating budget piece, as well as the capital items and other warrant articles, the basic structure is it's a public hearing. So we'll open things up. There'll be some opportunity for public comment. There'll be some advisory discussion, and there'll be another round of public comments, and then an advisory vote. And that's the point at which we on advisory actually vote either to recommend favorable action or to recommend no action, and we'll see how that comes out. That's really our chance to go on the record and make a specific recommendation to town meeting. In the course of the piece of that's advisory discussion, I'm going to want everybody to kind of explain their thinking and either just, I'm in support of this, or if Nora says something that I agree with, I can say, yeah, I agree with Nora, so that everyone in the public can kind of get a sense of where people are and what the thinking is that's behind a decision. So when we get to the second round of public comment, people can actually react to that. And of course, when you get to the vote, you can change your mind if you hear something that changes your mind. But just be prepared, one, to vote on each specific warrant article, and also to at least offer a few words on each one about sort of what your thinking is and how you got to, how sort of what your thinking is and what your reasoning is. Like that makes it really helpful for people, for the public, for voters who are listening in, to kind of have a sense of the thinking of the committee. And I think we make everything much more transparent. So just wanted to kind of get that all out there as kind of a, how are we going to do that in whatever two and a half weeks when we get to March 16th. Any questions or any comments on that before we kind of jump into doing reviewing capital items? Actually, we'll go back into approved minutes before doing that. So let me stop this screen share. Let's see. There we go. My Zoom is being a little funny here. Okay, so let me pop minutes up. So these are minutes from our February 7th meeting. I will do a screen share in just a second. And I don't think Natalie's gotten on yet, but thanks to her for putting these together. So I'm hoping everyone had a chance to read through these. I'll do a quick scroll through, would welcome any suggestions, corrections, comments. There's one place, Jeremy, where I think I have a question for you, where I just didn't know a particular thing, which is going to be highlighted in red in just a second. And if anybody wants me to stop to read a piece more carefully, just speak up. So here's the question: the public water supply treatment and the short-term and long-term action. And based on testing where we are now, I know everyone in town hall, I think, is drinking bottled water. Is that the case for all of town campus, or is that just town hall? I wasn't sure of the facts on that. If Jeremy, if you
Yeah, that's the case for all of the town campus buildings. So
okay.
the police department,
Okay.
town hall, and the community center.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure to get the facts right on that. Excellent. Thank you, Jeremy. Okay. Anybody with any changes or corrections? And if not, I would welcome a motion to approve minutes as edited on the screen.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, so let's do then quick roll call. Let's see, I want to flip this around. Shelley, let's start with you.
Aye.
Thanks. Mike F.
Aye.
Ken.
Aye.
Mike W.
Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
Nora.
Aye.
And I am I as well. So minutes approved 7-0. Thanks, everybody. Let me kill that screen share and bring us back to a normal setup. Okay. So then on to items. The first one is the open space and recreation plan. So Sam Nelson is going to present on that. And given my connection to Sam Nelson, I'm going to mute and shut down, and Mike Winters is going to handle this part of the meeting. And when we get to the next item, I'll pop back on. So Mike, take it away.
All right, thanks, Dan. Sam, I don't know if I believe you have some words to say, a presentation to kick this off.
Sure, I have a few comments. Thanks, Mike. Good evening, everyone. As most of you know, the primary mission of the Open Space Committee is to preserve and protect the town's open space and its environmental and recreational resources. To this end, the Open Space Committee publishes and revises the Open Space and Recreation Plan, and that's what I've got right here, an environmental master plan that identifies specific challenges, goals, and strategies for the town's governing boards and committees. By state law, this report must be updated every 7 years. And we are in the process now of updating the 2018 plan to have it ready by 2025. And our request for $10,000 is for professional editing and layout services, as well as for publishing this particular document. I will just let everyone know that many other towns actually contract the whole thing out to consultants to write for them, which is a price tag of $30,000 or more. So we are actually, by doing it ourselves, saving the town quite a bit of money, but we would like assistance for professional editing and layout, and then the printing costs. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask any.
Thank you, Sam. Advisory committee members, any questions on this?
I just was curious how many copies of this get printed?
In the past, we've printed 200. I think this year we are going to print only 100 because more and more people are accessing it online. And it doesn't make any sense to print that many copies when they just sit in a closet in town hall. So it's about 100 copies that we're going to do.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions from other members? All right, seeing none, I think we're all set, and thank you very much, Sam.
All right, thanks, Mike. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mike, for taking care of that. As everybody could see from that, right, we're not voting on anything tonight. That'll all happen at the public hearing. This is all just information and discussion. Okay, so our next item is information technology items. I think Klaus Ullman is on. If you want to take us through that. If you have a document you want to share, that's great. If you just want to talk, that's fine. If you want me to share something, just let me know.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Again, thanks so much. Appreciate the time. Yeah, Dan, I mean, do you want me to just walk through the documents that were submitted, or at least
Sure.
just to say a quick couple of words on each?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Sure. Let me go ahead and do that. Is that coming through?
Not yet. Now it's starting. Okay,
There we go.
now it's there.
Okay, so yeah, so for the IT group, we've got 4 individual items. I know there was some discussion previously relative to sort of the thresholds, or would it make sense to bundle each of these into sort of one total IT capital request? I think for the sake of the discussion, and see if there's any individual questions on the projects that they represent, I thought I'd just spend a couple of minutes talking about each of the 4. The first is the one presented here. This is for a server and computer upgrade and replacement. We do have a number of aging servers and PCs across the town, particularly in the town hall. To date, we really don't have a sort of replacement program in place. That is something that we are working towards and trying to build into the sort of yearly budget. But instead of sort of increasing the budget at a substantial rate in order to do many of those at the same time, part of it is going to be done here, and then we're trying to add the additional funds in sort of the budget basis on a year-to-year clip. So this is asking for $15,000 for the replacement of 2 servers and up to 5 PCs or laptops, depending upon which individual machines are needed to be replaced at that time. So the second item here is for a town campus security improvements, we're calling it. This is based upon a number of asks that have recently hit my desk over the last year, to continue to expand out the camera-based system that we have currently in place at the police department. So this would be an ask for $50,000. This would include the installation and addition of about 8 additional cameras. This would be 4 for the library and 4 for the external town hall areas. This will essentially cover the entrances as well as the parking lots. Same for the library. And this would be an add-on to the existing camera infrastructure that we already have in place, again, at the police department. This would include all the labor, the equipment for it, as well as the licensing and software costs to bring us current on that. I do know that there was a question the last time we had a chance to go through this in terms of, were there any particular incidents that that we would have felt that, having visibility to the parking lot or those areas would have helped the town. I did have a chance to speak with Chief Galvin, and he, obviously not going into specifics, he did cite a number of incidents that, were very beneficial for the cameras that were at the police department. But he indicated that there were some of those incidents that they would have benefited from some additional visibility that they just didn't have from that single building. So this would be, the ask is really just to expand our capabilities and hopefully provide an additional level of security to both the town hall as well as the library complex. The third item is for an upgrade and replacement of the video switching system in the town hall meeting area. As you guys are very well aware, the transition to hybrid-based meetings over the last couple of years has really put a kind of a stress and strain on the capabilities that we have at town hall. We have been very fortunate, and we received some grant funding to increase some of the equipment there. And we do have now the video system as well as the large scale display on the back wall of the meeting room, which is really providing the basis for a number of our hybrid based events. We do have some additional equipment that needs upgrading and would be fantastic to integrate into that system, which is really the audio and video switching that gives capability of streaming some of that information back to DSE TV, as well as to the overhead projector and screen there in that same meeting room. So this would be an ask of $10,000 for the equipment and installation for that. And then the last item here is for the upgrade and replacement of some town Wi-Fi equipment. We have been through a multi-year process now of upgrading the overarching wired and wireless infrastructure here across all the different town buildings. We've done fantastic over the last 2 years in particular, and we've really gotten the our infrastructure to a very high level, which has been absolutely fantastic and certainly aided in the capabilities, particularly with having to do with the hybrid meetings. But a number of buildings are lagging, in particular the police department, the fire department, and the DPW are still in desperate need of upgrading their Wi-Fi equipment to bring it current with what we do have now in both the town hall and the library. And so the $12,000 ask would be for the equipment and infrastructure to upgrade and to add the same type of equipment that we have at the town hall and library into those 3 buildings. So with that, I guess I will stop there and I'll give you the screen back, Dan, but obviously open to any questions that you guys might have about those.
Yeah, thanks, Klaus. Appreciate the presentation and appreciate all your work on getting this pulled together. As I've said before, I'm a big fan of the efforts you've made to kind of bring the IT infrastructure of the town kind of up to a more modern standard. I guess one thing that maybe you could say a little bit more about is this was a question I think that came up in the Capital Budget Committee discussion. So on the cameras, how many cameras? And I'm guessing with the licensing, this also includes something like cloud storage for some length of time, or how does that work with where the video goes and how many cameras and where does the video go?
Yeah, no, good question. So the camera system that we have already in place at the police department is a wired and internal based system. So none of the video goes external to resources outside of the town's hands. And obviously that's an important thing. Obviously we want to use it for our own protection and our own security. The police department have to use it as part of their credentialing process. So it is not actually allowed to go to a cloud system. So what that does is that does hinder us a little bit in terms of maybe some things that we would love to do on a little bit of a cheaper basis. So this really forces us to continue to go with an enterprise class solution, as well as make sure that all the cameras are hardwired. So to be honest, the bulk of the money really goes towards the physical cabling, labor, and equipment. that would be the add-on cost. There is some money in there for the upgrade of the software, and that's really just to bring it to the newest version. We'd use this as an opportunity to do that for the infrastructure itself. There's some licensing costs, but that's relatively nominal. It's about $100 per camera. So this ask really includes the addition of 8 cameras total. So it's going to be 4 cameras covering the external areas of the town hall, and then 4 additional for the external areas of the library. Those would all feed back into the existing platform that we already have in place. So that includes all of the storage required.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Nora, go ahead.
Thanks, Klaus. By the way,
Sure.
capital budget, if it's the same numbers here, voted 3-0 in favor of this. So thanks for getting back to us about
And Nora, I'm 3-0 in favor of each of the different items, right?
for this, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
My question is, so how, is it a 24-hour storage?
Yeah, it's actually a 30-day storage. So what it does is it would be a rolling 30-day period. We do have the ability to flex that if for some reason we felt that we wanted a greater amount of coverage, but from experience, particularly on the PD side, they found that that hasn't been necessary. Usually, if there's any kind of incident, they're aware of it, or there's a call to pull video long before that 30-day period. But at that point in time, it essentially overwrites past that 30 days.
Then one other quick question, when you have the different vendors there, are you getting additional quotes, or have you already gotten 3? I just think of the 3 quotes, or is that the vendor you're definitely going to use, or is that kind of a
So in this case,
and then
yeah, no, good question. In this case, only 1 quote was obtained as part of the ask for putting this forward, and that was we received a quote and a site visit by the vendor that installed the camera as well as all the electronic door mechanisms for the town campus areas. So since they were the one that put that original system in, we already have service with them. It was logical to get the initial quote from them. It is likely we'll try to get additional quotes beyond that, just to make sure that we're not missing anything as part of the process.
Thank you.
Other questions for Klaus? Concerns, questions, things people want to know more about?
Hi, Klaus. I had a question about I think it was the first item that was with the computer equipment replacement.
Sure. Yep. The server and PC replacement.
Yes. I was curious how often, I think you said those were pretty out of date. How often are you finding that those are in need of replacing?
That's a really good question, and a long hallway we could go down. But typically, in sort of enterprise areas, and obviously you guys do a lot of corporate work. PCs tend to be replaced on sort of a 3 to 5 year cycle. That's sort of what we consider normal. Obviously, for town and government, it tends to be longer. We are somewhere in the 10 to 12 year range. And the 2 servers that are looking to be replaced are actually more than 15 years old. So they're really starting to show their age. And the thing that we're most concerned about is the catastrophic failure. Of course, they're backed up, and, we're not concerned necessarily about the data being, losing that data if we do have a catastrophic failure. The problem is that, we can't just go to the store and get another server. It takes time to get one back into place. And obviously that would potentially impact the day-to-day transactions and ability for town hall specifically to do all the jobs if we had to wait 6-12 weeks for a replacement.
Okay, I guess my question with regard to however often you have to replace the equipment, it's just has there been any consideration to doing a rental of any of the equipment, particularly the items that would need to be replaced more frequently, I guess, where that technology improves in the shorter term versus owning equipment?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's something that we've actually started talking a little bit more about. We currently do not have any service contracts with vendors to rent any PC or server-based equipment. They do exist. In my experience, it really comes down to volume. And unfortunately, that's not something that we have in terms of the Sherborn playing into our favor. If we were looking at renting 500 type devices, we're starting to get into an area where the cost modeling makes sense.
Okay.
When we're looking at like a dozen or so kind of devices that are really kind of a heavily used throughout the day, it still is better for us from a cost perspective to just purchase it and then try to squeeze out maybe 8 or 9 years out of the device.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question.
Paul, go ahead.
Hi, Klaus. How are you? So I didn't see in this budget anything around cybersecurity, things like ransomware and malware attacks. I'm curious if you could comment on where we stand with respect to those things, and if that's an upcoming expense or whether we're already well covered for those things.
Yeah, well covered is always, I think, a debatable item. I believe that our stance in cybersecurity is actually a pretty decent and definitely much better than it was a number of years ago when we unfortunately did have an event. Right now, the vast majority of that is built into our budget because it's frankly mostly a service-based cost. So we work with a number of different vendors, all of which are now covered in our budget, and that was really what drove the budget increase this time last year, is to make sure that we were taking into account that. We do see some increases, and of course that was incorporated into this year's budget as well. But we're in a really good position where we're at from this perspective, so we haven't looked for the need to go from a capital expense. We're also applying for some additional grants, really, that just gives us some additional abilities to maybe expand some of the capabilities we have around, our email or spam scanning. We did receive a grant just recently for cybersecurity awareness. So we're actually just coming online with that program. And, that's actually going to just continue to bolster as well as test our capabilities.
Thanks, Klaus. It sounds like good news.
Yeah,
Thank you.
What else? Other questions, comments, concerns? So one more question. You said these servers are about 15 years old. Any thought to donating them to the Historical Society? Years getting up there.
Certainly could if they're looking for equipment. Absolutely.
I didn't mean for them to use. I meant for them to put on display as old pieces of antique computing gear. That was where I was going with that. Sorry.
Yeah, they'd start to have that have that patina. That's for sure.
Okay, so I have to work on my delivery. I'll try to do a better job next time. So before we let Klaus go, anybody else with, as I said, questions, comments, concerns? Okay, great. Thank you, Klaus. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks, guys. Appreciate the time.
And Nora, we should have asked you right at the outset on the presentation from Sam Nelson on the Open Space and Recreation Plan. How did Capital Budget vote on that one?
3-0.
In favor of.
In favor. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. We should just keep that rolling as we talk about these things to keep track of what Capital Budget said.
Thank you.
Okay. So our next item is Pine Hill School HVAC. Dawn Fattore, thank you for joining us. Floor is yours if you want to share a document.
No, I don't have a document to share, but I also have Dennis Quant here he's the chair of Sherborn School Committee, who's spearheading some of the building studies that we're doing at Pine Hill right now. Dennis, do you want to just give a little overview of the sort of the initiatives that the school committee has voted to, again, with our working group, which includes actually Dan and Jeremy and Stephen Side from the board, just so we actually have involved all the different groups in these projects. But Dennis, if you just want to give a little perspective from the school committee, I think that would be helpful on sort of your goals on the two studies that we've undertaken so far.
Yeah, let me just jump in, Dennis. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear
Perfect. You. Great. So thank you for that sort of quick summary here. So yes, I'm the chairman of the Sherborn School Committee, and this sort of focuses on the Pine Hill School clearly. And we've been on sort of a bit of a journey here, working collaboratively with a number of folks in town to try to assess really two things from the Pine Hill infrastructure perspective. First is sort of the fit for purpose of the actual building itself, recognizing that it is a kind of older building, and just sort of what the systems in the building are doing from a service capability, and then also taking a look at some of the more acute issues related to the HVAC and the cooling in the building, particularly in the kind of edge months. So at the beginning of the school year and at the end of the school year. Over the past couple of years, regardless of whether there have been snow days or not, extending the time of the school year, we've had a number of relatively hot and humid days that the folks in the building have had to kind of work through. And this past year, we've actually had to affect the actual school day because it was just too warm for kids to safely be in the building. So as a result of that, these two sort of large scale kind of issues that we're trying to think through, we're trying to sort of assess some of the data that we need to understand sort of where is the building currently, both from a fit for purpose perspective as well as from a heating and cooling, and get the data necessary to sort of establish a well-reasoned sort of path forward in terms of how to solve for these problems. And Dawn, I will kind of go through the results of some of these studies here and go through the summary of the capital request that is before you guys tonight.
Thank you, Dennis. And Dan, just to clarify, was the report shared with advisory?
The one that just came out today?
No. The HVAC ventilation systems assessment where we pulled all the data from the projects that we're bringing forward to capital.
Don't believe I shared that with everyone.
Okay. So a quick synopsis. So there were, as Dennis said, we did two studies. We hired an architect firm who does a lot of municipal building and school work to come in and do what we call just a basic building assessment of Pine Hill to allow us to sort of see what our path going forward is. But in addition, we had a separate study with an electrical engineer service group that came in and looked specifically at our ventilation systems. And as Dennis mentioned, we have had a lot of pressure from staff and families at Pine Hill to do something about the heat and humidity. It's a dual problem at Pine Hill that we've been experiencing when we start the week before Labor Day. So September is traditionally sort of a warm and humid month, and then we encounter it again end of May, 1st of June. And it has been a lingering issue. It's probably 10 days where it's really bad, and it's where we really find ourselves having to pivot from a regular school day is when there's multiple days in a row, and there's no relief to the air in the building if we have like 3 days of hot air. So we had this report done. They actually expedited it for us so that we had the potential to be able to bring some ideas forward for capital. I will preface this by also saying the numbers that we're presenting tonight are capital projects that will not be taking place this summer, what we're traditionally used to seeing, but the following summer. Mainly based on the availability of getting HVAC equipment in, and also the time that we still need to do the building specs and the design, the building specs, and the bid process. So we are looking for sort of approval from the town that they support this project, but the funding really will come the summer following this one. So the report basically went sort of building area by building area, and really the classrooms are one area, and as you know, we have an auditorium, a cafeteria, a library wing, and a gymnasium. We, as school committee and the working group and the school committee, are bringing forward to the town to approve us moving forward with air conditioning or bringing in new HVAC equipment that is actually servicing multiple purposes. It would be the air exchange, the heat, the cooling, and the biggest piece of that too is it's bringing a dehumidification into the building. And we'd like to move forward with doing the auditorium, the cafeteria, and the library. So they gave us some ballpark estimates as to the cost of doing this. And so we took the high end of the range for those 3 projects, added 30% for soft cost. And that's basically the 375,000, 400,000 that you see. I think we agreed at capital last week to put a placeholder of $400,000 for those 3 projects. The work that would be involved with this, the equipment, would be something that would be long-term in the building, and would not deviate if we decided to do something more of a larger overhaul on the building. The classrooms is probably the biggest overhaul, and is what we're waiting on doing. But these areas are thinking that are areas that would, one, serve to give large cooling areas to the school to be used during those days where it's hot, provide some basic dehumidification. And the library wing specifically is where we have our 4th and 5th grade classes. By doing that area of the building, it will provide relief to those classrooms, which tend to have our higher temperatures in those hot periods. And just generally bringing in some dehumidification into the building will make even the days that aren't 90, but that are 80, much more comfortable and a better working environment, both for our staff and our students. The other thing that school committee is going to be voting on in March, but we've already had discussions with our working group, is that the school committee has a building rental fund where we do collect rent on youth programs that use the school, but also our after-school program. If you're aware of Pine, it's called Sheeta. And so we do charge rent to the Sheeta program because it's run by the region. And so we pay rent from the region to Pine Hill to administer that program. We are looking to fund 100,000 of this from that building rental fund. So I believe, if I have this right from last week, capital approved 300,000, knowing that earmarked $100,000 coming from the school committee funds.
All right. Dawn, Dennis, does that get you to the end of what you wanted to?
Believe
share?
so, yes.
Okay, great.
The only thing, yeah, Dan, the only thing I would add is that there's been a ton of work with the town to kind of think through this. The school committee is sort of fully behind it. And we think we're kind of looking at it as this investment in our kids and whatnot in that building. As Don had mentioned, this is not the entirety of the building, but we're trying to take sort of a well-reasoned and stepwise approach to kind of take the edge off, if you will, and allow us to kind of more fully study the building and, really think about, the appropriate use of the town's funds to support sort of the ongoing maintenance of the Pine Hill School.
And my understanding, just a couple of quick things. My understanding is the auditorium space actually has very limited ventilation. So actually that's not up to code on just the ventilation piece, aside from the dehumidification
Yeah, that was an area that the engineers felt needed to be addressed, more urgently. I sent them a message last week that to give me a quote for sort of the design and cost estimation process of this, but also asked them if there was any way we could actually expedite the auditorium piece to this summer, knowing that we have funds that would be committed from the building fund that we would have to be able to move this forward. I haven't heard an answer back on that, but given some of the issues we have right now in that space, that there's not an adequate amount of heat, it's a dual problem in there. And so if we were looking to potentially expedite that by using sort of the funds that we would set aside from the building fund. if we were able to do that, we would be able to move forward with that one piece without having to worry about when the town was going to borrow.
And I think you must have said this earlier, but what were the numbers on the kind of like last year or the last couple of years? How many days in those shoulder seasons when temperatures in the building got kind of
Yeah,
too?
so so at the end of last year and beginning of this year, we rented actually mobile air conditioning units for a month. It actually doesn't matter if you rent them for a week or a month, it's about $10,000. So we've already put within June and September, we've spent $20,000 at least trying to bring some cooling in. Even with having that cooling though, this in September, when we had 3 days in a row, it was not making an impact. So we actually bused classroom groups to the library for a part of the day. So we had our bus company was fortunate enough to have a bus readily available. And so it would just keep doing the loop and taking grade by grade to the library for an hour or two just to have some relief because it got beyond being able to stay in that building. We do have a couple of pockets of space. Our kindergarten has window units for air conditioning. We have some special ed rooms that have air conditioning. So we are rotating the students through, but even though we had school that day, I'm not so sure how much learning was taking place. And so whenever it gets to a point where it's just uncomfortable, we make do, but I don't think we're getting the best learning day. And so as I said before, I think in each year, we probably have a handful of days, maybe I'm going to say 10, where it's just not comfortable. But we make through, but I think we've had 2 days since I've been here. So let's say 8 or 9 years where we've actually had to do an early release because it just wasn't sustainable to leave the staff and the students in the building the whole day.
And then one last thing, I know it's kind of the early days on interpreting everything in the last study that landed, but your sense is that if the plan going forward were to do renovation of the school rather than think about, at some point in the future needing to replace the school, that these units would live on and it would be a part of that rather than something that would need to be taken out and redone.
Exactly. I think I tried to say that at the beginning, maybe it wasn't really clear. The areas that we're doing is typically how you would approach an area if you were doing a whole school. Many of our larger areas at Chickering, at the high school, the middle school, all have separate HVAC equipment for, say, our library, our choral rooms. So this would not change. Doing it piecemeal like this would not change how you would look at the building in totality. These would still be handled in this way. So we're just laying the groundwork for potential. And I will say I just sent out the building assessment report today, but the initial viewpoint, I think, of the architects is that there are good bones there at Pine Hill, and probably our best direction is going to be renovations. And we can share more information about that as the working group is able to listen to what they have to say and discuss it. But it does look like we'll be investing in the existing building. And so this makes complete sense, even more so now that we sort of have their opinion on the long-term piece of it. And I will say, just representing all 3 school districts with all the schools, Pine Hill is our only building right now that does not have air conditioning for our staff and students. And that does come up during negotiations and such. So it is something that we need to be more, I think, aggressive with addressing. And I do feel, knowing that sort of Chickering had dehumidification, but not the cooling when they installed the air conditioning over there. Dehumidification makes a huge difference on another bulk of days that we'll get from this. And we are having, there are things in that building over the summer when it's so humid that do sort of deteriorate our ceiling apparatus with the tiles, taking that moisture. We're seeing a little bit of moisture issues with the floor, some of the older floors. So that will also help preserve some of our existing assets by just having that ability to sort of more able to regulate the air that's coming in into the building in general.
Okay, thanks, Don. Sean, did you want to get in quickly here, and then we'll get to advisory members?
Yeah, I was just going to make a couple comments. One, I read every word of that assessment. It was really well done. Everyone needs to remember this isn't just about air conditioning, it's about ventilation. There's actually less ventilation in areas of that building right now than there was when it was built. So the auditorium is a perfect example, and I'm glad Dawn is eager to do it. It should be done ASAP because that's the health air quality that we're lacking. And anyone that's had kids come up through, I'm looking at Jeff on the screen. I'm sure he remembers almost falling asleep during all school meetings. There's a reason that happens. When you sit in the back of an auditorium with 400 people and you have a cup of coffee in your hand at 8 in the morning and you're falling asleep, it's because it's not healthy air quality. So the lack of ventilation in the building is contributing probably worse than the lack of air conditioning. Air conditioning, as we know it, is just cooling and dehumidifying. But when you're not exhausting and bringing fresh air in, you're going to get people sick. So that should be addressed, ASAP.
Just that one space. The rest of the building is adequate. Believe me, we had our engineering studies during COVID to test the air ventilation, but the auditorium, just so you know, was never used during COVID. It was full of furniture and used as a storage space. So
right,
no
but
concerns there.
It has a unit the size of a freight train that's shut down because
exactly. Yeah,
it's not working, and it should be brought back into compliance.
Okay, good. Thanks. Thanks. So advisory members, questions, comments, concerns. Nora, you want to start out?
Just to start off, that capital budget approved this 3-0, and also the original ask was higher, and during that meeting, it was brought down to the 300. So just to kind of report back on that as we go along. Thank you.
Thanks. Other questions for Dawn, comments, concerns?
Dawn, I had a question. Hi, thank you for the presentation. I just was wondering, so the areas that aren't going to be addressed if this moves forward are the classrooms and the gym. Were there any other areas? Did I miss?
The gym. So I will tell you, none of our schools have their gymnasiums air conditioned. It's not an area that we would typically spend to do that with. So we discounted that one right away. And the classrooms is a huge undertaking. Just so you know, the report came in a little over $1 million just to do the basic ventilation for all the classroom areas, because we have the various wings. And in addition to that, if we want to add air conditioning to that, it's like another $1 million. So just to put that in the perspective of what what would be undergoing to bring the classrooms up to sort of that same total full package of heat, cooling, and ventilation. That is basically the book. So the other areas is like the main office and the lobby. So there are a few little other areas in there, but right now, if you think about it, the lobby, like in the summer when it's the hottest, is when we really have very little activity in there. I think there's some summer programs that come in, but that's a summer camp. And we have window units in our main office, so they're at least comfortable when they're working in there in the summer. So we picked the areas to move forward with right now that would have the greatest impact on school day activity, and knowing that the cafeteria is used from about 10:45 until like 1, with all the grades rotating for lunch. That's a great opportunity. We also take care of over 100 Pine Hill students in our after school care program, which runs from 2 to 6. That's another really hot part of the day. Their main programming takes place in the cafeteria and the auditorium. So that's another huge benefit for the students who do stay longer during the school day, to be in those areas that would be hopefully have better temperature control, because those are their two primary locations for the program.
Okay, and this, I think you said, so the plan would be that if this were approved, then the work would be done in 2025, but this is a capital request that's being asked for 2024, right? To
allow us to be able to proceed with actually procuring, getting the contracts going. It would be something that would go out to bid before your next capital project sequence would work. would start. So that's why we're coming forward early to be able. We also have a short time frame. We have to do all of our work in the summer, you know, between school getting out and school coming back in. So we have a tight window, which means we need to get into the market early to make sure we can secure both the equipment being here on time, but then also a contractor to be able to do secure that time for labor. So these units are not crazy large. If you heard me last year talk about the rooftop units at the high school, those are sort of larger, more significant, and we are seeing huge delays. We delayed that till next summer. That's why I'm hoping if we can work with this engineer and potentially expedite at least one of them, that we might have a fighting chance of doing this work in the coming summer. So that's what we'll try to do if we have a smaller project, and then the other two we would proceed with for the following summer. Otherwise, they'll be off rate in the summer of 25.
Okay. And there's no, like, we can't take advantage of any economies of scale in doing, like, while we have any of this work being done in these areas that are of most concern, auditorium, library wing, and cafeteria. There isn't anything that could be done kind of to prep the classroom areas for down the road that would potentially maybe reduce those costs? No.
No,
Okay.
no, there
Curious.
isn't, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay,
No,
thank
these
you
are
so
pretty
much.
self-contained. The other good news, we got actually to move forward with these 3 particular areas. If you, the report also mentions that one of our hiccups to be able to do the whole building is our current electrical capacity. They did go look deeper. I gave them all of our utility bills, and they were able to look at our load now, and they were able to tell us that we could do these 3 areas without having to worry about any kind of electrical upgrade. The next set of projects that we do will incorporate a need probably for an electrical upgrade, based on the load that the building would have to undertake to add all these more extensive pieces of equipment to it. But the 3, that was great. That's actually what sort of helped us turn the corner and say, okay, let's go for this, because we don't have to worry about electrical upgrades in order to get these 3 areas at least covered.
Okay, thank you so much.
Penn, go ahead.
Well, this sounds extremely well thought out, and I'm impressed by that. My question is, when will, so I gather there's potentially, when will the decision be made on whether to renovate Pine Hill or replace the building? Because my concern would be putting money into the existing building that's, going to, essentially disappear if the building gets replaced.
Right, so we just got the report, but as I mentioned, the initial feedback I've received from the architects is their recommendation would be that this building that we currently have, based on their assessment, would be something that we'd look to renovate versus move to a new build. And there's multiple reasons for that. One of them too is the availability of MSBA money, and based on the factors of a elementary, the needs of an elementary school, our current square footage and our current enrollment, most likely we would probably qualify for MSBA funding at that point. And that would be a deciding factor. If you say you just want a brand new building, we're not meeting some of those basic requirements to qualify for MSBA funding. However, even taking that out of the equation, their assessment of the building is that it's in good shape. There's things that we obviously are getting close to its useful life and will need to be replaced, but it's a building that's worth renovating in various phases versus starting anew. So like I said, the report hasn't been shared necessarily with school committee yet. I'm just giving you sort of a little preview, but I think that made us feel comfortable that this makes even more sense. Even if you said we were going to build a new school, that process is not fast at all. It's probably an 8 to 10 year process by the time you get through all the approval processes, make all your design plans, get the contractor and such. So that's more than half of this useful life of the equipment that we'd be bringing in. Say it's 15 years, 15 to 20 years. We actually make our things last longer in the Dover Sherborn schools because we provide, we do a lot of preventative maintenance. But we're not seeing this as a short-term investment. This looks at more of a long-term investment in this building.
Thank you.
So who else? Questions, comments, concerns? This is the easy time to ask all those questions and get as much info as
Yeah, and we're just to reiterate, so we're working off a study, right? So a study that it's full of caveats of saying this is our best guess, this is, so our next step is to pull out those 3 projects that we're presenting to you and have the engineers go and do the true design work and give us more accurate cost estimations. And that's why we went with the high end of their range and added the 30%. So, and then we went with the 400,000 versus I think it really adds up to 375,000. So again, these are not your typical numbers that we come to you because we already have quotes. We are just making sure we can keep this moving along. And our hope is that we still stay in this range. I just want to make that caveat. And also, I think it's important, however you present this on your warrant, to sort of asterisks or whatever you want to do about the contribution from the school committee themselves on this project. And it's probably important to say it's $400,000 in total is sort of the total project. But there's external, however you want to say, additional funding that's not being asked directly from town, but coming from school committee related accounts.
Yeah, thanks. On that, just before we go to Mike, Dawn, it sounds like, and Dennis, it sounds like the school committee hasn't yet voted to do that. But I take it from the discussion that there's high confidence that that's what's going to happen.
And I've talked to, at the region, which, oversees the community ed programs, we have a treasurer. So I spoke to him when he was here last week. And it may be that we actually do a capital assessment to Sheeta of sort of 50,000, and then we get rent from them that would get us to this 100, but it will be definitely funded. So there's no issue with that. And it will be sort of publicly voted in that they'll agree to do it, but the region will actually agree to allow the assessment. So
And-
yeah.
And on the school committees, it sounds like there's strong support for putting the 100,000 into this.
Dan, and I can sort of comment on that as well. Simple answer is yes. The studies that we're talking about, we're not trying to sort of like make a decision and then support that decision with data. We made the decision to get these studies done, and the school committee was voted on those to spend the money and jointly with the town to kind of have these studies done to let the data guide what we think the decision and the best sort of fiscally responsible path forward is. So I have no concern that what Dawn had outlined would be approved by the school committee as we're kind of analyzing this stuff over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, thanks. Mike Flanagan, go ahead, please.
Hey, thanks, Don and Dennis. Just a couple questions. What's the plan for the hot days? Given that the classrooms aren't AC'd, and is it moving the kids into these other 8 air-conditioned rooms?
Being able to sort of like rotate them through, but also at least, so the kindergarten wing has the window unit, so we're covered with kindergarten. The 4 or 5 wing, once we do the library, those classrooms all open up into the library. So by closing off that space with those doors when you're coming into the lobby, we feel like they will get relief from having the big space air conditioned. And then the other wings, it's just a couple of days that it's really uncomfortable. But if you've already got some of that cool air in the building, we could still then rent some of our the portable units to go down the hallways in the 2-3 and the 1-2 wing for some relief. But again, we could take our, we have like 3 or 4 sections. We could actually then turn the auditorium if we needed it into partial classrooms. So we do get creative, but it's a lot less students to have to move around if we have some of these areas that are, I want to say, professionally cooled, and not just with what we've been doing with the rentals that we that we have. But we feel the 4 or 5 wing is the one that gets the hottest temperatures, and by doing the library itself, huge relief to those classrooms.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. And is the plan eventually either through this remodel or renovation to ventilate the classrooms, the whole building? Is that down the
Definitely, I
road?
think the ventilation, to get the better air quality in there, get rid of the old univents, and have more of our energy system maintaining the inflow and the outflow of air. Right now, it just sort of maintains the heat. So you've got a much more energy efficient air ventilation with it being attached to our energy management system. I think we'd give a little bit of feel of how much humidity is coming out of the building with the areas that we're doing, to see if you want to add, if it's worth to add that extra million for the air conditioning for a handful of days. I do think by pulling the humidity out of the building with the first phase is going to greatly reduce the number of days that are uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's part of maybe what I was thinking is I mean, the auditorium sounds like its own issue with ventilation that needs to be addressed. That if the classrooms were AC today, would we likely still proceed with this current project? And understand the $1 million is the big number, but are we putting $300,000 or $400,000 as a safe stop, as a bridge to this $1 million spend? And would we be better off just spending the $1 million and doing it?
Well, you would still do these spaces anyway, though.
Okay.
You wouldn't do the classrooms and leave the cafeteria unair conditioned, or the cafeteria, the library. I think that those would be areas that you would want to do, because if anything, those are the areas we use in the summer where it would be really beneficial to have. And those are the areas where 180 days of the year, we've got 100 kids in there from 2 to 6 in those areas. So I don't think you would just do the classrooms and not do the larger areas as well.
Okay.
I think, Mike, to kind of tie into, I think the question that Penn was getting at earlier is we're trying to throw good money at a good solution, not good money at a solution that we may have to sort of rip out and not use going forward, depending on what the results of sort of the broader building study sort of ensues. And I think this solution sort of threads the needle between being sort of fiscally responsible, meeting the needs of the town to provide a good learning space for our kids, and obviously all the important staff and teachers that work there, and kind of figuring out the best way to use these solutions to flex the way it is that the administration sort of runs this. Like the points that Dawn had made around bringing these rental units in, and then even the busing to to other buildings in town. Like the administration has these backup plans, and they're sort of thinking through different ways to be creative and really flex the resources that we already have. But we think this provides just sort of a much better place to be operating from on a consistent basis.
Good. Okay, thanks. And then I guess just my last one, I guess I recognize this is a maybe more contentious topic, but Dan, you brought up a couple weeks ago the E&D fund and how the advisory was going to ask to remit maybe some of those. I mean, if that was the path, could some of these funds be earmarked for this project? I recognize Pineville doesn't have an E&D fund, but could these funds be earmarked in the general fund for the town toward this project? If that were to be the path that were to be taken?
So if you were thinking of using E&D for this, I think that would be difficult, since E&D is in the region and the Pine Hill School is just a separate entity. So, E&D.
Sherborn's share of the E&D. If the E&D were to be given back to Dover and Sherborn, and our 50% or whatever could be earmarked for this.
I would actually think that the region would say if it's going to be earmarked, it should be earmarked for region capital projects.
But it would be the town of Sherborn's proportion of the region fund, right?
But exactly. But again, I don't think you're talking big money here. We're at 4% right now. We're within our 3 to 4% is what the policy is at the region. So 1% is not going to pay for a lot of projects. Bringing
No,
it
I
down.
guess it's $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 were to be dispersed back, and that would help funding some of this, right? Could help
Yeah.
alleviate some of the costs. We have 100,000 from this
But
school fund.
my 4% right now in E&D is like $1.1 million. That's at 4%. So I don't know if there's $500,000 or $600,000 there that would be necessarily given back if we're going down to 3%.
Well, I think that's up for whatever the committee wants to decide on how much E&D is appropriate for. I think the school committee is a broader question, right? But anyways, just a thought as we think about all the different options to fund what is from all the different budgets, a big capital spend this year.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks, Mike. Nora, to you. You're muted.
I got that. Thank you, Don. A quick question on there's a lot of land up there. Any thoughts on eventually, solar helping out? And also, what are the projected electric bills on these, just out of curiosity?
Right, so those would be numbers that would be come forth in the next set of reports, where they actually take these and break them down and do more of the cost estimation and give us that piece of it. We can definitely, we get questions about solar all the time. And so we could look at that, but we actually would probably look for external people to help us with that. We're very sort of a small office to try to be able to handle all of this is a lot. So we could work with the sustainability committee in Sherborn to see if any land over there is conducive to solar. Don't think the school committee does. The school committee doesn't necessarily, what I want to say, own the land around there to be able to make those decisions. From what normally that's the town or in Dover, it's like the park and rec. So that land, it's maybe behind us is probably cemetery, right? That's not sort of in our purview to use the land. We wouldn't want to put solar too close on the ground near an elementary school either, with the children being around.
Okay, thank you.
We could look, so one of the larger capital projects that's coming down the pike, but we've been holding off to determine what we're going to do with the building, is actually the roof replacement. So then that would be where you can marry that to see if it's a candidate.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Michael, I see you. I just want to see if anybody else on advisory wants to get it before I come to you, and I'll get to you in a minute. Anyone else on advisory with, as I said, questions, comments, concerns? Okay, Michael Lesser, go ahead, please.
Sure. I guess I had a few things, but solar thing just came up at the end there. We've had some little preliminary studies about the roof there. I mean, it's mainly been waiting to see what the roof project, when you do the new roof, as we've been discussing over the many years of waiting for that, because there's significant capacity possibly put up there, even with all the units up there. So that'll be something to come. The ground mount is a little tricky as to what space you're willing to give up or cut down any trees around there. So it's probably a little less fruitful, and the canopies on the parking lots are kind of expensive. But that could be looked at the same time when we do the roof. But yeah, it's been waiting to coordinate with the roof work for years, and that will make a big difference. And hopefully we'll have some good prices on electricity. The town's going to have an aggregation plan where there's some lower cost options. But we have to compare to see what the Pine Hill pays and what contracts they have. I'm not sure what they are.
We do purchase electricity, procure it for all three districts in one contract right now.
Yeah, we'd have to just compare it to what we have now and see how that fits in.
Thank you.
We can deal with. other thing I wanted to bring up is in terms of the speccing out of these projects here, to what extent there should be, whether there has been, or there's time to put in consideration of the sort of insulation and air sealing of the places where you're going to do the ventilation, because air sealing is important just for lots of heating and cooling issues, but on the other hand, it also might increase the capacity needs for ventilation. So it could cut different ways. But I know the building is quite leaky, having looked at that issue in the library wing with the cinder blocks there. And they were quite leaky back when I was looking at it, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago. But whether that's something to try to fold into the work that you're going to do as you phase it, is to get that upfront work done, and budget that as well, since air sealing isn't that expensive, but it's a matter of a timing issue. And then factoring that into the sizing of equipment in there. But so I don't know since I haven't been part of this to date, I don't know where you guys are on those kind of insulation and air sealing issues.
I think we're still way up at top, and then we'll be coming down as we, streamline what we're asking the engineers to do. One of the benefits is that they did the whole building assessment too. So they haven't just isolated and, narrowed just on the HVAC, but they've looked at the whole building. So that could be pieces that they have that they can put together. And the engineer actually did all the work for the mechanical systems in the major building assessment work. So we did sort of utilize, we're being very efficient with the use, because it was dual purpose for this piece, which was helpful for us.
Yeah, okay, then I guess just make sure it's looked in later, but that's for future stuff then. And yeah, the stuff.
Thanks.
The stuff looks good.
Thanks, Michael. Dawn, on the point Michael raised about the roof, which presumably at some point will be redone, any issues with doing the HVAC stuff first and then needing to do the roof after that? Does that create any complications?
I don't think so, given we're just doing, and they know that too, knowing we're just doing the 3 units, we can work around that. One for the auditorium, we probably would be using some of the real estate that the old equipment's already on. But we could take that, they could do maybe some prep work beforehand, but I don't think it would be worth, I don't think it's going to be cumbersome enough that it wouldn't be worth going ahead and doing this without doing the roof. I think we can do workarounds on that.
Okay. Anybody else with more that we should talk about tonight on this? Okay, then. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Dennis. Very much appreciate your coming and taking the time to kind of get everybody up to speed on this project.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And again, if there's any additional questions, just let us know. And as we get more information leading up to, town meeting and such, we will make sure we expeditiously let you know.
Yeah, our next big thing, right, is the public hearing on March 16th. So, if there's anything,
it'll be too soon for that, but I was thinking more towards, the April
town
meeting.
meeting. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good. Okay. Thanks, Dawn. Thanks, Dennis.
Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, so continuing on. Next is Sherborn History Center and Museum, and I think Sean is gonna start us off on that. Floor is yours.
It is. I'm not exactly sure what you shared from the original presentation. I don't have anything new as far as the plans. As everyone remembers, the original capital ask was for design and construction. During the capital budget process, that was rolled back to just design funds. So at this point, that's what we're asking for. We had settled on 150 in front of the capital budget committee. We've that was kind of mid-process through bouncing back and forth with a couple of other professionals. Sorry, I'm a little out of breath. I was running around the house before you got back to me. The, what we've decided to do is roll that back to 100. Again, this will be for the design of the space and architectural and engineering expenses to get the project to the point of, we'll most likely put it out to bid, but it'll be all the documents to put it out to bid so that potentially next year, a year from now, we'd be coming back to the town for whatever funds it is, all the funds, or a portion of the funds, funds to supplement grants, whatever it might be, for the construction. But we will, this ask is essentially for all the architectural and engineering to get it to that point and possibly carry it through construction on the professional side, construction admin. And again, this is the design that was presented for the basement of the library, which I believe the plans were shared with the original capital ask, right, Dan?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Yes.
Okay. Nora, so you want to start with
Yeah, they were shared, excuse me, with the capital budget committee, at least I know that. And capital budget last week voted 3-0 in favor of that. And actually it was a higher amount, it was 150, as Sean mentioned. And now it's at 100. Sure, that would be, anyway, that's what they voted, was 3-0 in support of that. And if you recall, the capital budget ask originally was significantly more, which was voted down. So they came back at that number. So that's what I have to say.
thanks. So why don't we throw this open for questions for Sean, things where people want to know more, and so on. Ken, you want to start?
Yeah, so what is the final estimated cost or the min max on the completed project?
So because we don't really have a design, it's kind of at our liberty to come up with a budget. The estimate we had that I presented to capital budget was basically an estimate based on the preliminary design and a lot of assumptions, because it was probably only about a 30-40% design. So that max would put you in the 900s on the construction. The benefit of just going back and asking for design, I contemplate, is, and of course you can understand why this adds a little bit of lift for the architects and the engineers. I think there's probably a couple of different paths to come up with a likely design that is the min and the max, based on what we may try to bring back to town meeting. And I think it's ultimately going to depend on what funding sources are out there. There may well be grants that dictate, you should go for this level or this size, the square footage, which may push us towards the max, or, if we're coming up short of that, we head towards the min. I don't really know what the minimum is. There's a threshold. There's a fair amount of work that has to be done that's going to cost the same whether we head for the min max, because it's a sprinkled building. So you're going to have sprinkler work. You're going to have, fire alarm work. The electrical work's not really going to change. So there's some things that, are at a pretty high cost that aren't going to change much. The fits and finishes and what you pay per square yard of carpet, that's going to change. How much glass you put into a wall versus plaster can change, and we can affect that during the design phase. I expect, partway through the design, probably a third of the way through before we're headed towards the final design for bid, we're going to probably do some value engineering and decide that. I would expect 500,000 to 800,000. That's what I would expect. But again, you can't quote me on that, and Don't throw that back at me a year from now, because I don't know where the escalation's gonna be, but that's what I would expect. I don't think it'll be significantly cheaper than 500,000 for that space.
And that's in addition, that would be in addition to the 100K for design work. Yeah. Jump to Nora and then Penn come back.
Sure.
So Sean, I asked this at capital budget. So if not 100, what's the 100 versus say 50 versus 75 to get somebody in there to start doing design plans? Is it an architect? Is it a planner / architect? Just how do we come up with that number versus other
Well,
numbers?
At this point, the number is based on several really smart people that I've reached out to that are in the industry. Again, most, if not all of them, work on projects 10 times bigger. So, but, you know, within their office, they're able to look at, you know, previous projects within the past few years and say, well, you know, the average is 7%, 8%, whatever it is, that we usually spend on architects and engineering. Now, again, none of them are working on, you know, $500,000 to $800,000 projects. They're working on $18 million projects. So your law of averages don't always work out that well. We still have to hire, you know, a handful of engineers regardless of the size of the project. So I think it's a pretty good estimate. The difference between the 150 and the 50 is, if we think it's 100 and you fund 50, it's this committee I'm coming back to for reserve fund transfer. Because if you short fund it, which this town is really, really, really good at doing up front in projects over the past 20, 30 years, it comes back to bite us. If we overfund it by $20,000, we're going to roll that into the construction admin phase, and it's going to cover the, you know, the architect fees during construction.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Penn, do you want to come back on more, Penn?
Yeah, please. So, originally this was, this material was in the town hall. And then I remember when the library reopened, I got a tour of it. Elizabeth gave me a tour, and she showed me a room down in the lower level of the new space and said, oh, this is the Historical Society room. So I kind of wonder what happened to the option of putting it in the town hall, or what happened with the library plan.
You were cutting in and out, but I assume you were talking about the space in the lot. When they opened the library, if she showed you a space, it was in the unfinished basement, I assume, right?
No, it was not. It was in the lower level of the new wing. And I think there was cases
You might have misunderstood. I mean, there's some historical cabinets that are in the lower level of the new wing, but the new wing was never contemplated to be used for the museum. That's all finished. That's our already finished space, mostly just meeting rooms in the lower level of the new wing. But when you leave the lower level, you need a key to get up there because it's locked for employees now, and head to the original building. That's the space. I'd love to take you through it. At a different time. I took Dan through it the other day, Nora through it a few weeks ago. But again, this space is in the original building. Basically one whole corner of the original basement is the space, and it's currently not finished. It is air conditioned and heated, just as kind of an open zone in what is the basement, and it's not what you think of it as a basement of like your home, because it's a different kind of structure. It's dry and it's good space, but it's not set up. It's ready to be fit up, but it's not there. It needs all new lighting. It needs the HVAC to be reconfigured to the space. The sprinkler heads will all need to be moved because they're just set up for open space. There's no walls dividing the areas.
Okay, thanks.
That's a lot of hands. Dan, you're muted.
Yeah, thanks. I have some comments too, but I will let others. I'll let others get in before I jump back in. Wasim. So, Wasim, did you step away? Nora, you want to go ahead and we'll come back to Wasim?
Yeah, I would highly suggest everyone go and check it out, whether, just to see the scope of it. There are no windows going, anyway, I think it's important for everybody on advisory to see the actual space, what you're dealing with, so.
Yeah,
And
I
also
find it.
wonder, go ahead, Dan, sorry.
No, go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
I think, Penn, what you were thinking about is the conference room that has some empty, beautiful shelving, glass shelves in there. I should say cabinets. That's probably what you were thinking.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let me pick up Wasim, Paul, and then let's come to Jeff Waldron.
Yeah, apologies. I have a double mute thing here going. So Dan, thank you. And then feel free to stop me if this is off topic. But one question I have about capital in general is now we're in a higher interest rate. Should we give consideration to any capital article of like, okay, well, is there value in actually just delaying that to hopefully next year, and then you be in a lower interest rate situation, hopefully. So is that something kind of open to discussion? Again, if this is off topic, please, you can table that.
Yeah, so I would just say I wouldn't necessarily say that that's off topic, but that predicting interest rates, and I know this from my time at the Federal Reserve Board, right? Predicting interest rates is really hard. And some of these, in any case, there'll be short-term borrowing for a number of capital projects, and then at some point in the future, they would get rolled over into a long-term bond. So it could easily be that some of these projects might not be financed with a long-term bond until a year from now when perhaps rates are lower. So, we could end up there anyways, but pretty hard to predict what's going to happen, I think, to borrowing rates. And, it's a little bit like trying to play the market with, is it a good time to buy stocks or not? Hard to know what the best time to borrow is. All right, Paul, quick comment, and then let's go to Jeff.
But I have a question that I think was raised at the Capital Budget Committee meeting. It might be raised at town meeting as well, which is what type of quality of a museum are we talking about here? Is it FMA? Is it MFA type? Is it smaller than that? Because I think that impacts how designers will use the 100K and what the final construction cost will be. So I think it'd be helpful to sort of characterize what type and style of museum are we talking about here. It's hard for me to support this without really having a better idea about that.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and that's kind of the crux of the issue, because that affects the construction cost greatly, and leaving that question open, which I'm not going to answer, affects the architectural and engineering cost a good bit, because if we say we have a conceptual design, which we have, and we present that to an architect and say, build this, create documents from this. That's a relatively easy task. But if we go to an architect and say, all right, give me the scope, here's the conceptual design, we need you to go to both extremes. I want MFA style,
right,
and I want, a low cost,
right,
get us in there. That actually costs more to design, because we need those options. But you save significantly, right? What you spend on the architectural giving us those options, is a dime to a dollar compared to the construction cost. So I can't answer that, because we're trying to leave that open. We're trying to come back with a firm number of, here's extreme A and here's extreme B at the other end.
Right.
And it costs money to develop that. And we want the architect to develop that. You don't want me to develop it.
Right. So I think then that leaving that open, I think maybe make people at town meeting uncomfortable or at the very least having a plan to say, this is who's going to make those decisions and by when, and kind of when will people have input into that process. I think at the very least having something like that would be necessary. I know that's probably not something you can answer, Sean, but maybe someone else could.
Actually, I can answer that a little bit because the trustees, the select board, myself and town administration are all going to be involved in that, as well as the historical society. And ultimately advisory and town meeting, but that'll be the tail end of it. But the early decisions will be made basically by committee. The trustees will vote on basically anything that needs to get approved within that building. Historical Society is driving it. Town administration is bringing it. And the select board needs to endorse it because it's kind of their project.
Okay, thanks. Jeff, go ahead and then I'll jump in with some comments.
All right, I have a I want to give a little background, but before I do, I was just going to address Wasim's things quickly. That I don't think saving money on interest costs would be offset by very rapid construction cost escalation. So delaying the project likely would not be a overall savings, or maybe would be a push. So I'm going to give some quick background. I'll speak quickly and you could ask questions, but I want to make sure people understand a couple of things here. One is, and I've mentioned this before, the town is committed to finding space for a museum as part of the original Douse donation of the Douse Library in 1914. We were committed to host the museum open to the public. So that's a commitment the town makes, and someone I think asked if that's a long time commitment. Those funders are still major funders of the town that the Douse family supports. So this is a commitment that we will support and continue to support. The second thing is what happened. The museum was actually fine. It was in the basement of town hall in 1,500 square feet of space, and they're getting about the same amount of space in the library. When we had COVID hit, Sean and I actually caused them to move out of the building into storage. All the artifacts are being stored in General Giant in Quincy right now. And they moved because when COVID hit, we could only have, because of the COVID requirements, only 2 employees per workspace. And we had a space on the second floor with 9 employees, planning board, conservation commission, board of health. We're all in one room with 9 people. So we could not function. We could not reopen town hall. And so within a week and a half, we got the museum to move out of their dedicated space, conditioned space in the basement of town hall to accommodate COVID. So that was a strategic decision that we made to try and keep town hall up and running in the whole COVID environment that we were operating in quickly. So that's how we got to where we are. They've been in storage for now. So we are absolutely going to provide space somewhere in town for the museum around 1,500 square feet, which is what they've actually moved about 4 times. They originally in the original Douse Library, then they were in the second floor of town hall. You people are new to town, but the police station used to be in the basement. So when we built a new police station, they moved downstairs. But part of the design cost is these are artifacts. These are hundreds of years old artifacts from irreplaceable archives and artifacts. So it requires a much higher environmental controls. There's one room with the paper documents that requires pretty strict, and Sean can elaborate, pretty strict HVA requirements to preserve historical documents. So these aren't just, looking at an old wooden loom that, is from the 1700s. This includes some very important town historical records that we're housing there. And it's also the reason why I push for this to be in the library. Is this an educational opportunity? This ties very closely with the educational opportunities of the library. And the space is on the same floor as the 150-person meeting room, so that then you could have students come in, say from Pine Hill, tour the museum, and maybe go have a talk, as we had last night. We had a historical presentation from Doug Brown last night on the praying Indians, and we had 100 people in the basement room and 50 on Zoom last night. Very well attended. So we're committed to supporting this space somewhere. We can work on the design and see what it is. But part of the reason why we're having to do this is because the museum accommodated the town and moved out very rapidly so we could move people into the basement of town hall, which has greatly improved the function of the what I call the planning department and building departments. So this is a strategic decision the town made. This isn't a it's not only a financial decision. This is a legal commitment we have, and it was a strategic decision to relocate the museum. Thanks, Stan.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. All right, so let me, before we pick up some more comments, let me offer a few thoughts. So, ultimately, this will be up to town meeting to decide, whether to support this or not. And I think, both at the capital budget committee meeting and a little bit tonight, some resistance to large sums of money and so on. So here's the evolution of my thinking on this and kind of where I got to. Super helpful seeing the space when Sean took me around, and I'd encourage others to do that if that would be helpful for you. One thing that became clear is that right now that space is filled with kind of surplus furniture, excess books from the library that are just being stored, and it's really just like, it's dry, it's dry basement space, but it's like just, kind of a dumping ground for stuff. And if that space were to be used for anything, be it the museum or anything else that was going to make it functional as good working space, it would take a decent chunk of money to do some of the things that Sean said to get that space so that it could be used as a meeting room or really anything. Because right now it's just, like a dry basement in a house where you kind of put all the junk you don't have another space for. So that helps me feel like it's worth moving forward, in my view. And I get that people on advisory, there's a wide range of views on advisory, and I completely get that and completely respect the very wide range of views. And again, in the end, town meeting is going to decide. But that helps get me more willing to, go ahead with the 100,000 that Sean just mentioned for the design, architectural and engineering work. And my hope with that would be, this came up a minute ago, and I recognize that there's some complicated issues, but I could imagine that, that might leave the town with some options, with kind of a basic option, ranging up to a higher end option. And then picking up on Sean's comment, depending on grant availability, private fundraising, that might dictate whether ultimately the town would want to pursue a more basic option or a more high-end option. And as somebody who was part of my career as an academic economist, have done a bit of economic history, the idea of preserving, the town records and artifacts and ephemera, seems like something that the town should want to do. I think it becomes, in my mind, a question of, what's the right way to do it, and how much money is reasonable to spend on that. So, I would hope that what might come back from the $100,000 design, engineering, architectural study would be something that would create a bit of a range so that, decisions could be made depending on, whether there's Community Preservation Act funding, grant funding, private fundraising available to then sort of strategically think about which path to go. So all of that said, this got me to the point, where I would be inclined to support the request for 100,000, following the capital budget committee, but recognizing from the comments tonight that that's clearly not where everyone on advisory is. All right, so I got my turn to put my 2 cents in pen. Let's go to you, and you can set us all straight.
That's what I'm here for, Dan.
I count on you for that.
So I got 3 sort of quick comments. One, when I hear the words museum, it just starts to set off alarm bells. I'm actually very familiar with the museum world. I have artwork I've shown in museums. My work's in museum collections. Same for my wife. We have 3 close friends who run museums, including a college classmate of my wife's. So museum, that's if we're using the word museum, that's a pricey way to go, I suspect. I've been making a point of talking to people around town and get, sort of, to whatever extent this is germane, I've been soliciting opinions on this. I haven't met anyone, and I've probably talked to probably 20 or 25 people. I haven't met anyone who supports this, the idea. And particularly if it's significant money, they really don't seem to like it. The other question is, with the obligation, I've got the documents on that, and I wonder if we're in effect overstating that. If I look at the most recent, got from town meeting, where was it? The town voted to that a room of approximately 700 square feet of space in a town building be provided. So for the Historical Society. So it seems to me that's the letter of our obligation. And I'm also not sure, I would like to know why it can't go back into the town hall. I understand that, people have spread out and enjoy that.
Holy shit.
Go ahead, Jeff.
No, thank you.
Jeff, you're live. You're not muted.
I'm aware of that.
Yeah, good. Okay. Go ahead, Penn.
I guess I would just like to see it seems like there's a sense of legal commitment, a moral commitment, some layer of commitment to this. And I would actually really like to see that, what those layers are spelled out. So it's not just the project, we want to do this project, we're committed to this project. It's like, all right, what do we have to do? What do we want to do? What's the range in between?
Okay, thanks, Penn. Mike Flanagan, go ahead.
Thanks, Dan. I guess I'm still a little perplexed at how we kind of wrapped ourselves in this pretzel, trying to save money by just approving the plans, and not actually what Sean put forward initially, which was the total project. And I would think we should tell the town what they're signing up for. I mean, if we didn't have any estimate for what this project was going to be, then yeah, we should go get plans and see what this thing is going to cost. But we have a cost estimator. We have a good sense for what the range is for this project. And so I think the town should vote on what do they want to spend on this project, because it's not $100,000. And if we go to them, we get that approved, certainly with no budget in mind that we're telling the architect, we're all but certain to spend the 900 probably that was initially proposed. And so I think this approach is the wrong approach and sets a bad precedent, frankly, here, and likely a wrong message for future budget makers of how to get things through capital budget. And is you do it in piecemeal and it's easier to swallow. But that's not what we're signing up for. We're signing up for, in this case, likely $1 million project, not 100,000. And I would think I would like to put some dollar number forward for the town to vote on. But what do they want to spend on the museum? Is it $1 million? Is it 500? What is it? But that's really what we're asking here, not $100,000.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mike. Sean, did you want to respond to anything you've heard, or should we just keep going?
No, I mean, again, I did say similar things in the capital budget meeting. I mean, it's not uncommon in the business world or even in residential world to fix a budget and build to that budget. We are playing a little bit of a game of cat and mouse. This isn't a building. We've short funded almost every building project we've done in 20 years. We knew what we were going to do, and we still short funded them. We do have the opportunity to fund it and then design to that budget. This isn't one that had a 2020, you know, spill like the highway department did, or, you know, other issues like the fire department had with zoning issues. This is a known project. We could design to a certain budget, but the town can't seem to wrap its head around coming up with that budget to box ourselves in. So we're going to do it the other way, where we design, we give ourselves kind of a range, and then a couple different committees can fix on it.
Okay.
Neither is really a great way to do it. It's not how I would ever construct anything, and it's certainly not how any universities construct anything. Let the designers tell us what it's going to cost, but that's what we got boxed into.
Marion, go ahead, please.
All right, well, advisory can go first, but I just want to make a comment. We do have a lot of materials. A lot of it is valuable in the town museum, but what's missing from my point of view, and I think for many people in this discussion, is what's the function? How is this going to be used? How much is it going to be used? I mean, we have things that we need to preserve. There's no question about that. We need a place for our historical documents and historical artifacts. I don't question that. And I'm okay with funding a design at this point. But thinking about the design, I haven't, maybe I've missed it, but I haven't yet heard a vision of how the space will function. And design has to be based on function. And that has just been missing from this conversation so far. So I'm not against spending some money on design, not at all. And maybe 100,000 is something that we'll have to spend, but I think it would be useful for the people. It may have been Sean doing the footwork on promoting this, where I'd like to hear, I'm getting some feedback, I'm sorry. I'd like to hear some vision on the use of the space and the materials from the historical society, whoever is driving this, and the design should follow from that. So just asking for that kind of information.
Thanks, Marion. Interesting point. I'm trying to see who's, so it would be interesting to hear back from folks from the Historical Society on the sense of vision. Jeff, did you have a quick comment on that, and then we'll go to Mike?
Well, I think we need to really think about how we do capital projects. And I've talked about this before. It goes with everything. We have no budget to do engineering and estimates. If we wanted, we did the same thing with the roundabout. We funded the roundabout design last year, and now we're starting the roundabout construction with a fair amount of state money. But the buildings department does not have an engineering budget to create estimates or to create designs. So almost every capital project we do, we have to have in year one some kind of design work, because we don't know how much it's going to cost. And so we have to do that work up front, and it gets to what Marion said about the function. But the library has, the only thing I disagree with Marion is they have a strong function. They've been operating for 100 years, and they were operating in the basement of town hall. So we know what their function is in terms of the public. But we don't have accurate costs right now to do this for any construction project that we do in town. It turns out the schools have an advantage with their excess and deficiency fund. They often at the regional level do the engineering design with their E&D funds, and then they ask for the work up front. But we don't have in any of the town budgets engineering costs to do preliminary, what I call a scoping study or scoping cost estimate that would give people a ballpark number. So we have to do these in a 2-year phase way for almost every project, so that because we can't come to the town and say, how much do you want to spend? We have to come up and say, what do we think is the best approach? And we can have several options, including, as Sean mentioned earlier, we can have, value engineering the project, and maybe have things we could have either deleted or added depending on what the budget level is. But we just don't have the numbers to present to the town right now in an accurate way.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. helpful background. Mike Winters, go ahead, please.
This is kind of circling back a bit to Penn's comments. I just wonder, is this really the only 700-foot space that we have available to us? Have we considered other options that might be finished spaces, whether it's in town hall or somewhere else? And maybe there aren't other options, but I just want to kind of get a sense for whether this is the only option or if this is just the preferred option, and what the choices might be.
Yeah, can I answer that, Dan?
Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
So over the course of a couple of years, much longer than it should have been, but COVID kind of allowed us a little bit of a delay. This has been well vetted. We looked at the community center because the community center came up on they termed out on their lease. There was discussions with the select board. There was discussions with the community center foundation. That building was taken off the table for a place to go. There's also numerous physical and construction reasons it can't be at the community center. Unless you want to get Dawn back on and find some space over at Pine Hill School. There's not another space in town in a municipal building. There's zero space at Town Hall that could be used to open this up. We're really at capacity, if not over. There's one office in the basement that's not being utilized right now, but it's full of records that are due to be scanned, and then put back into the vault area, and then used as a flex space. But that building is overutilized. It was overutilized before COVID, and it's still overutilized. 2019 2020 was probably the only year it was not overutilized, but we had to spread everyone out. So there's not another space. This has been voted on by the select board. This has been voted on by the trustees. It's honestly the best space in town to go use. There's other places in town that might be better for storage. There might be other places we can create. There might be other spaces at the DPW we can create for storage, but there's no better place in town than the basement of that library. And there's no more fitting place in town than the basement of that library to keep the historical records and preserve the historical records. So we will not spend another minute looking for another place. That's where it's going. Whether it gets funded this year or not, that's where that historic society is going to get put.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean. Shelley, go ahead.
I just kind of wanted to comment on something that Jeff said, just about the not having the funds for doing the design work. I mean, has there been any research into grants for the design work? Because I know there are certainly efforts to preserve history. So I'm wondering if there are any grants or if that's been looked into just for the design aspect of it, not for the build out, but for the design aspect of it.
Sean, do you know anything about the status of that?
No, I wouldn't have access to grants for the design. Jeremy has his hand up and he might be able to. I mean, I honestly think the best place to find grants is post design. The best chunk of change we're going to find is if we get a design and we head towards putting it out to bid. And then I'd much rather yield my time to Jeremy.
You sound like you're sitting in Congress. If yield back the balance of my time.
Exactly.
You're making me feel like the Speaker of the House or something. Jeremy, go ahead, and then we'll come to my.
You wear that hat well, sir.
Yeah. Thanks.
I think Sean already mentioned it, but they generally any grants that are available for such projects generally like to go towards the construction, not the design. And actually in the grant application, you would need a design basis to submit for the grant. So generally there's not grant funds available for design of projects. And I also wanted to touch on what's been mentioned earlier. It is a very common approach for communities to fund design ahead of construction. This is not like a unique thing. It's a very common approach that communities take, so that they can, incrementally work on a project, and not commit entirely to a project until they have more details on it. But that doesn't mean that even if you're going into and fund design, you can still guide your architect or your designer to meet a certain, you're not giving them an open checkbook. You're working with your designer the whole way, and you're going to guide them towards what the final design or the bid documents are going to be, and the cost of that. So I just wanted to mention it is a very common approach to do design, then go for construction later.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jeremy. Shelley, did you have anything further that you wanted to get to?
My only other comment then was kind of dovetailing off something that Marianne said, which is just understanding how the space is going to function. I mean, I wondered if we could maybe even have a smaller space and maybe have a rotation of exhibits versus having every single thing on display. Now, I don't understand what all is being stored, so I don't know if that's even possible. I'm just throwing it out there as a, if we did something like that, maybe that would drum up, they could do something to get the community involved, but a rotation of exhibits, like an art museum has specific things that are featured at certain times. I have no idea if that would be beneficial. I'm just throwing out some ideas. I don't know if that would mean that it potentially would be less space, but then we'd obviously have to keep storing the items. So I don't know if a goal is that every single item be stored in this space, in this museum, or if we're still going to have offsite storage for certain items that have to be, climate controlled, but they can't be fit into the space that's being proposed. I don't know enough about this, so that's just thinking out loud.
Okay, thanks, Shelley. Sean, go ahead if you had a.
Yeah, well, I could speak to a little bit of that, and again, I don't shy of putting a couple DPW guys in there to man the place. I can't speak to the entire operation, but there's a couple things that play into the size of the space. They have some pretty large cabinets, historic cabinets as displays, with displays in them. So they needed to fit those in. That played into some of the layout. They definitely can't display everything all at once. So they do rotate. They were doing that at the town hall in the space they had. I don't think anyone contemplates storing things off site in climate controlled. I think it's intended that this would bring everything in. But I would guess that there's barns all over town that people own that have artifacts that are owned by the town of Sherborn or historic artifacts. We might see most of them this year in the 350th celebrations, but they won't all make it in the library basement. The important things will, and the space. Maybe we could play with the square footage a little bit. There was some basis to why we split up. There's columns in the basement and why they chose those columns as to where they go. But again, that's something we can work on with the architects, and seeing how we can break up the space differently. But it's kind of how they divided the basement. And I see Margot turned her camera on. Maybe she wants to talk.
I was really hoping, well, first of all, yes, I would like to speak.
Margot, go ahead, and then we'll pick up Mike and Natalie, and then we should probably wrap up the conversation. Margot, go ahead, please.
My name is Margot Powicki, and I've served on the board of the Sherborn Historical Society as a director for nearly 40 years, maybe longer. We certainly went through our entire program with a preliminary designer and preservation architect. And so the preliminary designs were based on how we operate. With regards to storing things off site, that just absolutely wouldn't work. We finally got all of our stuff on site, and we probably will not be taking any more things into our collection at this point. With regards to the 700 square feet that we were allotted initially, at the same time, we were privileged to place our cabinetry and displays throughout the entire building in the town offices. They were not just in a 700 square foot area. We were also allowed to just use things on all of the walls. And you know, George Fisk is our president. I was hoping that he would be chiming in. But if you have any further questions for me, I'll try to answer them for you.
Thank you, Margot.
Oh, the other thing I should add is we have been in storage since 2020, paying Gentle Giant every single month, or the town of Sherborn has been. We are also presently having the privilege of 1,000 square feet in a private building for some of our archives. So we are working every single day on those archives to try to get everything organized in anticipation of finally getting back into permanent space. If indeed something should change with regards to that rental space that we have at no cost, we would have to go back into storage until some decision is made. So there has been a continuing financial impact ever since 2020 with regards to the Sherborn Historical Society.
Okay, good. Thank you, Margot. So let's go to Mike Flanagan, Natalie, and then we'll give Jeremy the last word, and then I think we should move on to our next item. I think we've had a good conversation about this. Mike Flanagan, go ahead, please.
Sure, thanks. And I certainly appreciate the need to spend money on plans and design ahead of project cost estimating and all that, and why you would need that. I'm just wondering if that's the case here for this project, because a considerable amount of work has already been done, I believe, ahead of time. I believe they spent some money and they've already done that. And I mean, I'm looking at an 18-page cost estimate of $922,000. I've seen a big poster of plans that was presented at the capital budget. So we're not starting from scratch here. We have an idea for how much this would cost, unlike maybe the Pine Hill School that who knows how much it would cost. But this is not from ground zero here. And so that's why I think we should ask the town, what do they want to spend here? Because we have a sense for what it should cost or could cost.
Thanks, Mike. Natalie, go ahead.
Well, I was kind of the same vein as Mike was saying, is that Jeremy, you said we would take the 100,000 and design it, but we already have a design. And if we don't tell them how much we're going to spend, how are you going to get them? You're going to give the person 100,000 and say design something, but you have to tell they'll design to a budget, but we don't have a budget, right? The budget we have is $1 million, and we've already designed to that. Is that correct? I might be Sean. Am I right? We've designed to $1 million budget, and if you give them $100,000, what are you going to say? Design to a different level? I don't get what you're going to do with 100,000.
Sean, go ahead if you want to jump in here.
Well, I'm not exactly going to do that. That what we had was a preliminary design, which leaves a lot of things up for assumption, and then we had an estimator, a really good estimator who's good at taking those assumptions on design and pushing them out to a cost. What we'll be able to do with a designer, remember that, there's an architect. We hired an architect. He did a preliminary design. We have to hire a different architect after we put that out to bid, and he'll hire several sub-consultants, a fire engineer sub-consultant for the sprinklers, an electrical engineer, for obviously the electrical work, maybe a lighting engineer. He'll do his own work on the walls and structures and fire access. And he can go in multiple different directions. He can probably land a design to land exactly at the 900 and some odd. He can probably land one at, like I said, the low end, which would be, I'm guessing 500 to 600. I don't think it can go much less than that. It's the two designs aren't going to change the sub-consultant's work much, right? You still need the same amount of sprinkler heads. You need pull stations and horn strobes and the same amount of electrical work regardless. The fits and finishes change. The HVAC doesn't really change much. We still need some really good HVAC for the historical preservation room, and we need to modify some HVAC to the existing library, so that doesn't change much.
If you got the $100,000, you go to a designer, what are you gonna tell them? Design a system that's gonna cost X amount of money. What's the X that you're gonna tell them? Jeremy?
What you generally would tell a designer is this is what you want to use the space for. This is generally our budget to do so. And that's what they'll work with. So
Okay, what's the budget you're gonna tell them? That's kind of what I guess Mike Flanagan and I are getting at is what budget are you gonna ask them to work to? And that's the one maybe we should be voting on. I think that's what Mike's trying to say.
I don't believe we have enough information to say.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges of the process that I think in part the hope would be that the 100,000 engineering design work would come back with some options that would help us understand better what can be done for different amounts of money, and have then, some choices to choose from.
That's why I started with the budget with the original ask. If that was your question. It was crystal clear a couple of months ago.
Yeah. All right. So I'm thinking we should wrap this discussion.
Dan, can I add a little bit of detail as far as the amount of material and artifacts that the town currently has?
Yeah, go ahead.
Currently, out of the building facilities budget, we pay about $1,200 a month to General Giant to store all these artifacts. In addition to there's a very generous private donor in town that is storing many artifacts as well at no cost to the town. But we currently have 13 crates at General Giant. Each crate is 7 feet by 5 feet by 7 feet. And like I mentioned, we spend about $14,000 a year to pay for that storage in one of their facilities in Randolph. And unfortunately, none of those artifacts are available for Sherborn residents to see because they're in storage.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. Marion, you get absolutely the last word because then I do want to keep us moving here.
I'll let you just keep moving, but I just want to throw in, hoping to learn this later at some later meeting. Do you have enough room, even in the space in the library that you propose, to store all the artifacts that we have? If not, then how is the space going to be used other than storage? So I'll stop there because we have to close it up.
Thanks, Marion. Okay, so obviously on this topic, there's obviously a wide range of views on the committee. I think that reflects what I would imagine is a wide range of views in town. And ultimately, of course, town meeting is going to have the final say. On this. So again, for those who are new to advisory, at our public hearing, we'll hear from, I'm guessing, a pretty good number of people who in town who will have views and opinions that they want to share on this. Hopefully, some of the questions that have come up tonight will have been able to gather some further information on to clarify that. And then in the public hearing, we'll vote and we'll see what happens. Whichever side, I'm not a good enough vote counter to know how this is going to go, and people's views may change in the next couple of weeks. But the majority will, write up in the advisory report, here's the majority view, and here's the rationale for that. And then the group on the minority side also has an opportunity to write up a report saying, we disagree with the majority recommendation, and here's why. So all of these views will get reflected in the advisory report, or can get reflected in the advisory report, and then ultimately town meeting will make a decision about this. Okay, so I know that was a complicated conversation with a lot of wide-ranging views. I found it really interesting, really helpful. Thought it was a good conversation, and a lot of really interesting and important points came up. Just so that we don't get too late here, I want to move us on to the next piece that we're going to talk about, which is our last one for tonight, which is the Rec Commission capital, the tennis courts and pickleball courts. Sean, do you want to just put something in the chat if you had one more thing to add in?
No, 10 seconds. I just wanted to leave the invite open for anyone that wants to go see that space in the library basement. If I can't make it, I'm sure Liz can accommodate, at least for people to see the space.
Yeah, thanks. And I'd encourage people to do that. For me, it was really helpful to get a look at the space. Okay. So Dave Goldberg, Dave Welch, however you guys want to divide this up, the floor is yours. If you have anything you want to share, that's great. Thank you for being patient as we went through that last lengthy conversation. Share screen if you want. If there's something you want me to share that I have, I'm happy to do that too.
Sure, appreciate it. I'm actually going to defer to Dave Welsh. He's been spearheading the project around the tennis court resurface, as well as the ADA accessibility of that facility, and the addition of the pickleball court. So, Dave, I don't know if you want to kick it off by showing the design plan that we've got, and we can walk through sort of the details of the project and answer any questions.
Yeah, sure. So I will attempt to share the screen. I'll start there and see how successful I am, and then we'll roll forward. So give me 1 second.
So I know that there's been a lot of discussion about design. Fortunately, the Recreation Commission, we have revolving fund. We've already funded the design of the project, so we have a sense for what it is we want to do. We looked at several designs that we voted on. We brought it in front of the capital committee. They asked for some revisions. We came back with some revisions, and we'll go through the state of it as it is.
All right, so hopefully you can see my screen if I was successful in sharing it. And what you should have in front of you is a design that we paid for earlier or late last year through our revolving funds. So we get a jump start on this project. So we'd have more detail to share both the capital budget advisory and as we move through ultimately with the town or any other interested parties. And so this design that was developed was also used to create an estimate, which was the estimate that we shared with the capital budget committee. It was the same estimate that after the first couple of go rounds with capital budget helped us identify areas that we could phase, specifically the lighting, because it resides outside the perimeter of the courts that need to be replaced and the fencing that needs to be replaced. And they're in sort of a mid to late life cycle, but they can certainly, while you could do the lighting as part of this project, you can certainly wait, another 3 to 5 years and tackle it as it's, needed at a later stage. And that's not to say there won't be some incidental electrical / lighting work associated with this project, but we believe that we can take care of that within Sherborn Recreation using the revolving fund, where clearly this is a larger capital expense when it needs to go before the town. So when you look at the design here, the original design that we had even before we brought this one forward to the capital budget committee actually had 4 pickleball courts. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but there's to the right of this building, which is to the right of the 2 design pickleball courts, which is the existing concession stand press box for the Jameson Little League field. There's actually a design that included 2 additional pickleball courts to the right. Ultimately, we decided, both because of the cost as well as aesthetics, that it was a bit too ambitious to include that. So we consolidated down to just the 2 new additional pickleball courts and the renovation of the tennis courts and fence area. And the other component of this project is layering in ADA accessibility, which would include a walkway, parking, and access over to the snack bar in both court areas.
All right. Anything further, or did you want to throw it open for questions and discussion?
Well, the other thing I thought I'd share with you, since I think it'd be easier than having you come down to the courts, is I'm going to bring the courts to you, so to speak. So I have some photos that will show the existing condition of the courts and why this work is needed sooner than later. This is, if you're, I went down today just so you can get an idea. That's why the courts are still wet. They were taking this afternoon, so these are the latest and greatest condition. If you went down, this is what you'd see today. And so what you have in front of you is one of many cracks, long, winding, and in some cases very wide cracks that exist all over the court surface. And the court has reached a level of age and disrepair that you can't paper these over anymore. So there is a process where you can, at the beginning, in the earlier life stages of, tennis courts, pickleball courts, asphalt courts, where you can do resurfacing, you can fill in cracks, and it's not cheap. It's tens of thousands of dollars to do 4 courts, but it allows you to do the type of project we're asking you to consider today to a later date. But these courts are decades old. And
I should say sorry, Dave, not to interrupt. We did actually do just that about 7 or 8 years ago. It was before I joined recreation. So we have tried to extend the life of the courts as much as possible. So it's gone through several resurfacing, but it's at the point where that's not an option anymore. So at this point, the courts really need to be torn up and then redone. Sorry, Dave, keep going.
Yeah, thank you. And so, there is this process that you would certainly do if the courts were brand new. Every 8 to 12 years, you do the type of maintenance Dave was just alluding to that's been done in the past for these courts. But we're well past that point, and it wouldn't extend the life of these courts. No one would willingly take this, this work on because it doesn't make any sense at this point. So that's one, it's one of many cracks. The crack I just showed you is outside of a playing area or adjacent to it. This one's actually within the court, and you can see how it's starting to impact the surface. And so ultimately, beyond just playability, you start to invite other risks, such as injury and or if the courts get to a state of disrepair where we have to take the courts offline and you can't use it anymore. Just to continue on, this is an anchor, so you can see, and this is a process of over time. As if you're familiar with tennis nets, in the center you anchor it down, and through decades of New England weather, basically freeze thaw, heaves, and things of that nature, the anchors pop through your tennis courts, and so you can make an argument that, okay, well, how close are you going to get to it? Well, I'm not going to tell someone how to play their tennis shots, but eventually it becomes a hazard where someone could potentially catch a foot, an ankle, and injure themselves.
The other thing to mention is that once these cracks are opened, then the freeze thaw cycle actually is just going to make them worse and worse over the next few years, right? So you're looking at the beginning. If you actually went to these courts probably a year and a half ago, these were very small cracks, much more playable. But we're getting to the point where, because we've had a wet winter, the cracks are opening up, and we just anticipate that's going to continue to happen, and it's going to get worse. So the longer we put this off, the bigger these cracks are going to get.
Yeah, what you're looking at here is you can kind of see between these two cracks. There's a bubble, and this is within the tennis playing surface. So if you were to step on that, it actually it's a raised bubble, and the surface goes down underneath it. It makes a little bit of a crunching sound. So eventually that's going to break through, and then that court is going to become unplayable. You're not going to be able to use that court any longer. So we're probably within 12 to 24 months. If you were to look at the stanchions and the hardware, none of them match. They're all in a different state of disrepair and or missing pieces. And we've been fortunate that there are people in the tennis community that but have been willing to help us when we do replace nets to make sure that they're anchored properly. But this is not, this is not the original design of this crank. This has been rigged to hold it in. All this stuff needs to be replaced. None of them match, and they're all in different various states of disrepair. This is one of 3 gates. That's a threshold. You can't really tell, but the post on the left actually sits 2 to 3 inches above the ground. So not that you could actually get, if someone had ambulatory challenges and want to participate in a court activity, they wouldn't be able to get into the facility if they were in a chair. And they certainly have significant challenges if they were trying to walk through here with any type of ambulatory issue. And so one of the issues we found going around the perimeter with the fencing is that a lot of the fence footings have detached from the court, and they're elevated in the air. And this has 2 different effects. One is it's a bit of a hazard, and the second is it makes it more prone to the pole at some point failing and tipping over. But the third issue is, it's a more practical one, is it makes it a lot easier for the tennis balls to get underneath the fence as the fence posts keep raising. Here's an example of that. So we have balls on this side. This is about 3 to 4 inches out of the ground. You can see the erosion around it. It's popped up out of the ground. And so you have, ultimately, you have balls going across the street. You probably don't want your kids running across the street chasing tennis balls. A lot of the posts are in a state of disrepair, either rusted, bent. It's just years and years. This looks like a tetanus shot waiting to happen. You can see the age on the facility. It's given a good fight, but it's towards the end. And here's a side view of where one of the 3 entrances are. So if you think about the design that we started with, the overhead view, we have the existing practice wall on your right there. That's where the 2 pickleball courts would go. That area needs to be raised to the same height as the tennis court on the left, and then you'd have an ADA accessible walkway and an accessible gate that you get through that would be level. And so you'd have your tennis courts and your pickleball courts and the walkway all leveled in the court area. And I think this photo also highlights why we can do the lighting later, is because it exists outside of the court. There's nothing that in the process of redoing this course that dictate that the lighting needs to be addressed right now. And so if we can get an additional 3 to 5 years, which we believe we can, lighting out of it, and that's one of the reasons why we pulled it out of the project. And this was after having it evaluated by 3 different lighting companies to sort of give us their impressions on what was going on with the lighting. This is the existing practice wall area that's below the grade of the tennis court. This is the area we want to repurpose for the use of the pickleball courts. So hopefully that's helpful in sort of giving you sort of a mental image of what's going on down there, the condition, and what we're trying to do.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Before we go with questions, comments, and I apologize if you said something about this earlier. Also, Jameson Fields, the Field 4, anything you just want to put out there on that for everybody?
Yeah, so I know it's the lesser of the 2 asks that we have, and so there may not be as many questions about that. The baseball diamonds, they're intended to be, they have a service life depending on weather and wear and tear between 6 to 8 years. Sometimes you can get up to 8 to 10 depending on maintenance and weather and things of that nature. Our Jameson 4s are only 90-foot diamond that's utilized by Dover Sherborn Youth Baseball Softball between the 2 towns. And the diamond itself is long overdue to be renovated. So you have an issue today where the specifications that you would use to play baseball are all out of whack, meaning that your mound height to the plate is incorrect. You have lips, which creates a lip on an infield diamond creates a launched baseball to the infielder's face because there's a difference in the grade of where it should be versus where it is from erosion and wear and tear. And so it's the Jameson 4. It's just at that life stage where it needs to be all 4 diamonds need to be redone. We prioritize them in order and what needs to be done first. And right now, Jameson 4 is the next one up, if you will.
Yeah, I should mention that we're fortunate enough to have revenue from leasing the fields. And so we've already taken care of J3, which is at the bottom of Pine Hill Road. So we did that 2 years ago. This past year, in cooperation with DS Youth Baseball, we redid Jameson 1. Again, it's a smaller field. We were able to fund that out of our revolving fund. Where Dave was going was that J4 is the largest of the fields, and that's it's a bigger expense. It's not something that we can do out of just our revolving fund. So that's why we're looking to get it funded from capital requests.
All right, thanks. Dave, do you want to unshare and then everybody can get the bigger views of everybody? So I guess I have one question just to kind of start things off. Interested in, because you talked a little bit about little cracks becoming big cracks and different kinds of maintenance interventions. So interested a little bit, looking back on how that's been handled. And looking forward, if new courts, pickleball courts, tennis ball courts go in, what would the plan be for sort of monitoring and catching those cracks when they're small, and then thinking about, I don't know about tennis court maintenance, so I just kind of looking for a little bit of a primer on how does the maintenance piece go on these kinds of facilities?
Yeah, I mean, from the information that was provided to me by the people who came out and evaluated our courts, as well as the tennis professionals that rent our courts for lessons, is that the work that we've done to maintain it was the appropriate work at the time that we did it. And there wasn't anything that we were going to do in the past, 2 to 3 years that was really going to change the outcome where we are today. On a going forward basis, we got decades out of the existing courts, and it's most likely because of the quality of the original work that was done when they were first installed, but then the ongoing resurfacing that the courts typically may require over time. Now, in some cases, you may, due to weather conditions, bad luck, or otherwise, you may need to do a resurface in less than 10 years. You may have to do it every 6 or 8 years. In other cases, you may have to tackle that in years 10 through 15 or whatnot. But those expenses pale in comparison to what we're looking to do here today. The expectation is that the lifespan of the court, if properly maintained, should last you 25 or 30 years. And we got well beyond that with the existing courts we're looking to renovate now.
Is the typical maintenance approach to every, as you said, 8-10 years to do a resurface, or is there kind of an annual thing of, hey, these cracks opened up, let's deal with these cracks, on an annual basis, and then maybe on top of that the bigger resurface, or is it really a matter of you wait 8 to 10 years and then jump in and do something?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly the way it was explained to me was there's businesses out there that will come and fill your cracks, as they pop up, each year.
I saw some of those online looking around.
Yeah. So like it comes a matter of, it's like, okay, well, do you want to spend, filling cracks every year and whatever that's going to cost against doing a resurfacing, every 8 to 10 years. So I think it's, there's some, even among the professionals, some pluses and minuses to those different approaches. But the point is that you need to do some type of maintenance. You can't just let it ride.
And does the maintenance typically, is that something that would come from your revolving fund, or is that something you would come and ask for operating budget, or how has that gone in the past, or what do you think would be the right way to handle it in the future?
Yeah, I won't speculate maybe on the future, but I know in the past, I believe the last time it was done, the resurfacing, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was done out of capital. Okay. However, back then, I don't think our revenues were That
think to be fair, like whenever we can pay for something out of the revolving budget, we will, right? There are times depending on just revenue and other projects that are going on, we may not be able to. So, you know, yeah, there's no reason for us to come and ask for a capital request if we've got the money sitting in the revolving fund to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks. So let's others on advisory. Same thing. Questions, comments, concerns. Nora, you want to start off?
Yeah, just to let you know, capital budget voted 3-0 in favor of Jameson. And then the original ask, I think, was 675, Dave, if I am correct on that. And so we voted no on that. Then you came back and came with I believe it was 499, not 500. But we voted 3-0 in favor of. And a quick question, one of the things, may I just ask while I'm here? What I think when we asked at capital budget, you said it was about 12,000 a year that you get from fees, whether it's class, does that go towards the maintenance, or was it about 12,000 a year?
So it's actually less than 12,000. It's actually less than 10,000. But it's between 5 and 10, and that money that comes in, part of that is used to, like, we use that for replacing wear and tear items, which would include the netting. We did do some minor fence repairs. We also, for our programs that we provide for youth programs, we use some of that money to pay the instructor for offering the program. So a lot of the money that comes up through evolving, for the most part, is spoken for. It wouldn't be something. It's not an amount where that would, cover a project of this scope.
And then
yeah, we also bought pickleball nets. We've done 2 rounds of pickleball nets, as well as we provided a lockbox for them to store equipment in as well. So yeah, I mean, I would say that there's ongoing maintenance of the courts regardless of the surface itself.
Then my next question was, it came up a couple different times, I think even on a select board meeting, about, who's using the courts and enforcement. I mean, it says Sherborn residents only on the signs there, but unlike Farm Pond, there's nobody monitoring it, and there's no, what happens if they're all filled, and you notice, it just was interesting to find out, like, who's actually using the courts, and is there any kind of enforcement in that going forward in the future, or what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did discuss, well, a couple things. So the sign is there, and the people that are from Sherborn are not shy about asking people. So it's actually a lot of self-policing, which is interesting because, we only have, Sherborn Recreation only has 1 employee on it, and so I can't be at the courts as much as I'd love to from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. when we're open. But people that are playing down there, when I talk to them, especially if they're waiting, they're not afraid to ask someone else, are you a Sherborn resident or not? And it's a small enough community where most people know each other. Now, there are people that, for certain, come and use those courts that are from out of town. A lot of times they're playing with someone from Sherborn, sometimes they're not. And so, the sign's there as a notice to let people know that, they could do that. Now, what other towns have found when they've installed new pickleball courts, because of the popularity of the sport, is that it attracts, like flypaper for flies. It attracts a lot of people to come in and use the brand new pickleball courts that may not be Sherborn residents. And a lot of them have moved to a reservation system where they give the town residents the opportunity to reserve the court space at a discount or at no cost, up to 2 weeks in advance. And then if you're for a non-resident, you can pay a substantially higher fee, and you can only book it within 48 hours, provided there's excess capacity. And that's the way they have moved to sort of deal with some of these issues where you got people that are very attracted to the pickleball courts.
Or you could put a QR code or something there and have it up there and reserve your spot.
Yeah. We've been talking about reservation system for a while now. There really hasn't been a real impetus to implement something like that, but certainly we, to Dave's point, we recognize that the pickleball courts in particular will be popular. Also, I think the other benefit of that is, if you start chunking up the court time into, hour-long reservations, then people know that, if you're gonna show up, you show up at the top of the hour, and you have a more likely chance to be walk on, and you don't have somebody who's hogging your court, let's say, for 2-3 hours at a time. So
I would say if this goes through, I'd really like to see that.
yeah, sure. Yeah. We would have to we'd have to investigate some software and things like that, but certainly it's on our list.
Thank you.
Paul, go ahead.
Right. So thanks, Dave and Dave. I have a couple comments and a couple of questions. Dave, I thought the photos were very helpful to see the current state. I think I saw your presentation at the Capital Budget Committee of just the plans, but I think the photos really give a better sense of the current state. So maybe if you present a town meeting, I think that'd be helpful as well. And I want to thank you too for scaling back the capital budget ask with the fewer courts and phasing out the lighting. I think that's very helpful. The questions, I was wondering if there's a player safety aspect to the renovations, because that would be an important thing to maybe mention.
Such as
like players getting hurt, like twisting
oh
an
yeah,
ankle
yeah.
or getting injured.
Well, certainly
in
the
state.
cracks are not good in terms of
Right.
twisting the ankle or what have you. I would say that the other big concern, and it's a big line item in the project, is the fencing. One of the things that I don't think I appreciated when we started to line the pickleball courts, they overlay on top of the tennis courts, is how close the pickleball courts, the play of the ball, is to the fence, the existing fence. And if you've been to the tennis courts, you'll notice that the fences are curling in, and one of the I don't want to say complaints, but with the feedback that we got from the pickleball players is that it was quite dangerous, that they were getting too close to the jagged end bottoms of the nets.
Right.
We've tried to sort of makeshift a solution, but I still don't feel it's adequate. So there's certainly the potential for injury there, and obviously if we
Right.
fix those fences, we'll eliminate it.
Thanks. That's what I thought. I think those are helpful things to bring up. The other question I had, which I think you answered earlier, Dave, was what's the life expectancy of the new court? I think that's good information for people to know.
Yeah, so 25 to 30 years in New England would be a reasonable expectation.
We think those courts are older than that. I don't think they've been replaced in my lifetime. I don't know. No one. I don't think anyone can remember when they were done.
We've asked to have multiple meetings, and we can't find anyone in town that can give us an attestament that, like, hey, this is when they were installed. I was there. Maybe someone else knows. Maybe the historical society knows, but it seems like it's long overdue.
What else? Wasim, go ahead.
So maybe questioning a little bit of the process of, rec, you have a revolving fund, and so you get to do an engineering study from revolving fund. But I'm questioning that process because, you still have a budget, right? And you're still taking a lot of money from town, right? So how do you decide, okay, what gets funded from revolving fund versus what comes to town, right? I mean, if this was, we were just discussing the Historical Society, for example, right? And that study needs to come to town as opposed to, the study being done from the revolving fund. So just really questioning the process, I guess, bringing that up. And the other question I have is, any consideration or reduced cost to having those pickleballs fields be kind of overlaid on top of tennis? Is that a consideration? I don't know to what extent those courts are heavily used, the tennis courts, that is. I'm speaking without necessarily having that background of how heavily those fields are used, and if there's a way to just overlay those pickleballs on top of the tennis court so they can be double function, let's say, if that saves some of the cost.
Yeah, so that's how we do it today. And there certainly is contention for court usage. So this gives us capacity that we don't have today. And I don't know that it's clear in the plans that were drawn up, but we would have 2 dedicated pickleball courts, but we would also overlay 2 more pickleball courts within one of the tennis courts. So you can fit 2 pickleball courts on one of the tennis courts. So we would actually have the capacity for 4 pickleball courts and 4 tennis courts. one of those courts, which would be sort of a hybrid that, depending on how it was being used at any time, would serve for one or the other. So yeah, I don't think we're going to have any problem with capacity. If you go by on a warm day, you'll see either pickleball and or tennis being played and people waiting. So I think that sort of answers hopefully the second question. The first is, I mean, we do have a revolving fund. We also have our annual budget. So the annual budget is spent on things like salary for Dave and our tennis instructors and summer go round and so forth. Things like field maintenance, field, like lining the fields, porta potties, what have you. So, you know, again, because we do charge for the use of fields, both for in-town teams and for, you know, for like club teams, we do have the benefit of pulling in money that we can use for things like this. So I don't know what the alternative would be. I mean, I suppose we could come in front of the town and ask for the, you know, the project or the plans to be funded, but that seemed like, I mean, I don't know that if we want to say that's the process, but I think that just draws it out when we have the ability to set aside some money for it. I think it makes it more efficient, and it means the town doesn't have to fund it out of another means.
Yeah, I mean, also the dollar amount of this particular study, it should be noted, was under $10,000. So it's a little bit different than, say, the scale and the scope and the expense of some of the other studies that you may be referring to. In which case, you may want there to be more input or you may need the help from the town to pay for it. But in this particular case, for the designs that we needed for this recreation project, it was under $10,000. And my understanding is that wouldn't reach the threshold for a capital budget request anyway.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good point, Dave.
Yeah. All right. So let me just float an idea that occurred to me. Mike Flanagan, do you want to go ahead?
I just have one question. The initial proposal, I think, was what, 650, and now it's 5. Can you tell me what changed from the initial proposal?
Yeah, the primary change, the significant change, roughly, you know, 75% of it was there was a presumption that as part of the project, we were going to replace the lights. And at some point we will need to do that. They're past midpoint life cycle. In a project like this, it would make sense to replace them at the same time. And in fact, if the lights were inside or on the perimeter versus, you know, 3 to 5 feet away from the fencing, you'd have to do it anyway, because you'd have to basically take them down in order to redo the courts. But in our particular case, it looks like we can still get another 3 to 5 years, maybe longer, out of the existing light poles, and they do not need to, based on the design that was developed by the landscape architects, they don't need to be disturbed to install. It made sense for us to phase it out of the project at this point to help, you know, save it for a time when it's actually needed versus, you know, doing it now.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Okay. So as I started saying before, let me just float an idea and see your senses of whether this would be helpful or not. You know, I mean, you saw in the museum discussion that, you know, there's resistance to big capital requests. I don't know how to predict, you know, how either that one or this one would go at town meeting. You know, that's I think a tough call, but I could certainly imagine in town there'll be some resistance to big capital requests, whether it's the museum or it's the tennis ball courts and pickleball courts. So another thing that's on the warrant this year is Community Preservation Act, and wondered if any thought was given to maybe breaking the project up into pieces, doing the pickleball, adding the pickleball capacity now, and then looking to, if Community Preservation Act passes, you know, that becomes a financing source that is really designed for projects like this, where there'd be some money, kind of a dedicated income stream, revenue stream, some money coming back from the state. And just wonder if any thought was given to that, as, you know, it would slow things down, it would delay things, but as a potential alternative way of financing without as big an ask for the town. So just interested, both of you, Dave and Dave, reactions to that, whether that's something that was talked about or considered at all.
Yeah, so a question akin to this came up during the capital budget committee meetings, which was like, hey, why don't you just put in the new pickleball courts and deal with the tennis courts at a later time? And the response then, as it is now, is that, as you can tell by the pictures, it's not that the pickleball courts, we're taking advantage of the fact that we need to, in order to make this project ADA accessible, because the tennis courts are in dire need of being redone, instead of when we raise the area where the current practice wall is now and putting up a new practice wall, we're just taking advantage of that space to put in the 2 pickleball courts. You'll never have a less expensive option to add pickleball courts than to do it at the same time as we're doing, renovating the tennis courts. And so if you were to do just the pickleball courts, you'd be introducing a lot of repetitive expense. That's the first thing you'd run into, but you wouldn't be addressing the underlying issue is why we're here in the first place, which is you have tennis courts, which are used 12 months a year by every age group, from little kids all the way up to your members of the COA. And that's really the main request. The pickleball courses, in some ways, we're just taking advantage of the fact that we're doing a project to provide ADA accessibility and renovating the tennis courts. It's kind of I appreciate the question, but it's not really addressing the issue of why we're here in the first place.
Yeah, I guess, it's a way of saying, that it seems like in a way there are 2 components, that there's a lot of demand for pickleball courts and the tennis courts are in need of some significant work. And I guess that would be the thought of, could the tennis courts stretch out another year or 2 of use and take care of the, adding the pickleball court capacity? I don't know on the costs, how it would go with, how much that would escalate costs. And it could be that this isn't a good idea, but I was just trying to think of, with a potential dedicated revenue stream coming for projects like this, it could be a desirable way to finance some of this kind of a project.
Yeah, I mean, the uplift for the pickleball courts is, I think, like 5%. I mean, it's not significant, right? The real issue is we need to replace the tennis courts.
That's the big expense.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'd rather just say, like, look, if the town doesn't have an appetite for it now, then we just wait and do the tennis courts at another time, right? It doesn't make sense to go after the pickleball courts individually.
Okay. Sean, did you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, it was just David just kind of hit on it. I think they went as far as they could, and maybe even almost further with pulling back the lighting. Doing the pickleball courts and not the tennis courts would be akin to paving one side of the street and not the other. Maybe even
it's my side, right?
Right. Well,
I'm kidding.
Doesn't really matter. Because you're going to destroy both to try to go back in. The equipment that's going to go in to redo that tennis court is absolutely massive. Picture putting a bulldozer on a brand new road. You destroy it. The pickleball courts would be destroyed. The fencing would be destroyed. You couldn't work around it. There would be no savings. You'd probably double the cost of the whole project.
Okay, just trying to be creative. I can see my ideas getting shot down, but trying to be creative here.
I'm just trying to.
All right, others on advisory with questions for Dave and Dave, comments, concerns?
Dan, if you just want to direct attention to Jeremy, just commented on the chat about the age of the courts, approximate.
Oh, yeah. So Jeremy put in the chat, so courts older than 2000, 2012 appropriation of 25,000 for repair. So a little bit.
Yeah, I think that was the last resurface. The courts are way older than 2000. I mean, yeah.
Well,
I'm sorry. Those courts are older than me and David Goldberg. I'm certain.
Yeah.
And so is the fence.
They might not be older than me, so you might not have that one going, guys.
I didn't throw that out there. I know they're older than me.
So what else? Other concerns or, reactions to the request? I mean, we'll all be, in a couple weeks voting on it, but this is a good time to talk about, share reactions and talk about any concerns. Yeah, Mike.
I just in my observations, it seems the practice well gets a lot of use. Are we not going to have a practice well going forward with this project, or
You want to bring up the diagram again, Dave? It is in there. I will show you where it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bring that back up just so you can see where it is. It's a good question. And I probably glossed over it in this whole process. But in the design, we were going to take, instead of dedicating a separate area for the practice wall, we're just simply going to move it inside. And if you look in the top right-hand corner, where I have the cursor, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor or not, but there's a tennis practice backboard that will be against the back right fence, so that if you wanted to practice, you could do that if you're by yourself.
While that's up, if I don't, is that going to be where the overlay is on the pickleball? I just thought of that.
Yeah, it'll be on that court there.
So can you move it over so it's not on the, what is?
That's a good point. Yeah,
Well,
maybe it goes to the other side. Yeah, I didn't consider that.
Yeah, we can do that. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
I just thought of that.
Right now, the overlay is in this diagram on the left side, right? The pickleball court on the left.
Correct.
And the original thought prior to Nora's comment was to move it over to the right?
Correct.
Okay. So interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually like that.
Yeah.
And Dave, I don't know if you also want to point out the ADA parking and sort of I mean, one of the big enhancements here is that we know we've been deficient from an ADA perspective. Not only for people getting over to the tennis courts, but also to the baseball fields. So that was a big piece of this was to add better, more accessible parking and ensure there's a path to the facilities.
May have zoomed in too much, but anyway, if you look on the bottom right, you'll see the additional handicap parking. That hopefully it stops moving. I may have overshot. But anyway, it's to make it easier to get over to the court area. There is existing accessible parking near the skateboard park, if you're familiar with that, near Ward Park or in Ward Park. However, if we were to put a crosswalk there, it would extend that walkway and have it run the entire length, almost going up to like the cemetery entrance. And so both from shortening up the distance, but also just being able to retain, more grass area, around the baseball facility. The thought was like, let's make this as, short a walk as possible. So we'll put in the plans, the additional handicap parking, the crosswalk, and of course the ADA walkway going over to the court area and to the concession stand.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So I've got one last thing. Others may as well. So the pictures you showed, highlighted the cracks and deterioration in the courts. I mean, would it be feasible to squeeze another year or two out, or are they really at the end? And this is the time it has to be done, as compared to squeezing out a year or two out.
So this is my feeling on that. And this is based off of feedback that was provided to me from tennis professionals, the people who came out and looked at our courts, and the people who did the design. And so you certainly could try to stretch it out another year. However, as a fiduciary, when you think about risk management and you think about, to what extent, do you wait? Do you wait until we make the determination that we've waited too long and we proactively close the courts and you lose access to a facility that is the only recreation facility in town that's open 12 months out of the year that every age group utilizes? Do you wait until someone gets injured? So it's like we've had people tell us professionally that this needs to be addressed. I've showed you the pictures. we're kind of socializing it. And then at some point you guys say, okay, well, you could put it off. But from a risk standpoint, I don't know if that's really prudent if it's something that needs to be done anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think the longer we put it off, the less of a opportunity we're going to have to make the decision about when we want to do it.
Yeah.
Right. That could be next year. It could be the following year, but at some point it's not going to be something that, we're going to be able to choose yes or no. So,
Okay.
I mean, we're getting close to that point.
Okay. And if town meeting approves this, and the voters approve it, how quickly would it get done? What's sort of the lag from, having approval and funding to getting is this like the school HVAC projects with, you have to get it approved now and it'd be summer of 25, or if it's approved now, it could be summer of 24. I don't know what the state of play is in this part of the construction industry.
Yeah. So based on the information that's been provided, I mean, one of the things we would do if it makes the most sense going forward is move forward trying to, right now we have an estimate. We can certainly turn that estimate and try to get bids contingent upon approval at town meeting so that it's ready to roll. The length of the project in terms of how long it would take to complete is a 3 to 5 month project. The best time for us to do it, both from a programming standpoint and also a utilization standpoint, would be the fall 2024. So we'd be looking to move on it relatively quickly because our heaviest period of use is April through probably like the end of July, middle of August.
Okay. Thanks. That's helpful. Jeff, you want to?
I have a quick question actually for the Daves, because my son did a ton of tennis there. Don't we have tennis camps, and don't we lease out the courts occasionally for groups or for tennis camps in the summer? So my way of thinking here is that's another reason not to delay, because they may see this and decide we're just not going to use these courts anymore because the parents that are paying for the summer camp will object to the conditions, and they may just decide that they'll go somewhere else. So I see there as a potential loss of long-term revenue. If they go somewhere else, they're not going to come back the following year if we have new ones. So I see that there's a risk of losing some of the sources of your revenue if we delay it.
Yeah, I mean, our revenue comes from a youth program in the spring, a youth program in the fall, court rentals year-round by tennis professionals, and then we do run a summer program there in conjunction with the summer go-round program up at the Pine Hill School.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. So who else? What else before we wrap for the evening? I heard one prediction we were going to go till 11 tonight, but that's not going to happen. So that's a good thing. Anybody else? Okay, so Dave and Dave, thanks very much. Really appreciate your being patient, waiting till the end, walking us through all of this. A lot of really valuable information. And that is just super, super helpful. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, so the last thing I was just going to mention is, we meet next week, usual time, and we will be talking about the warrant articles that are the non-monetary warrant articles. There are a handful of those, the Community Preservation Act, and some others. And I think there are also a handful of kind of operating budget things where I've heard from different people on the committee that people would like to talk about a little bit more. So we'll bring a little bit of that back as well. So that is everything I have. So unless somebody else has anything else for us tonight, I would be looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. All right. Quick roll call. Wasim.
Aye.
Natalie.
Aye.
Shelley.
Aye.
Mike Flanagan.
Aye.
Mike Winters.
Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
Nora.
Aye.
Ken.
Aye.
And I am aye as well. So we are 9-0 adjourning with everybody here. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody. Good meeting, interesting conversation. lots to talk about and think about. See everybody next week. Thanks.
Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Have a good night. Bye-bye.